All right, good morning. Hi there. So it's about 9 o'clock, and I'm so glad to see that we're still getting a chance to socialize a little bit and get some snacks, and you can certainly quietly do that throughout the presentation. So I'm so glad you're here today. So welcome to the IFAS Extension Collier County Vanilla Orchid Symposium. Ta-da! Woo! Let's see. So I'm Twyla Lee. I'm the County Extension Director here in Collier County. And let me see. Oh, so people ask us about Extension all the time. I don't know why people don't know more about Extension because we have a very long, illustrious history, but people don't really know. So I just want to give you my very, very short second floor to first floor elevator speech. And then, because I have other really exciting things to let you know about. So Extension history actually goes all the way back to 1862 to 1890 when land-grant colleges were set up, federally mandated by the federal legislature. And that was to have a land-grant college in every state. And they called them land grants because they actually gave each state some land that they could sell or use to make money to build a university so that regular people's kids could go to school and learn about agriculture, mechanical arts, and other topics. Then in the 1880s, agriculture research stations were legislated, and we're very fortunate to have 13 here in Florida. And the purpose of the stations was to really do best practices. What were the best crops? What produced the best, how to control pests and disease, and have the best food supply possible for a growing country. And then along comes 1914, and Cooperative Extension Service was born, and that was to take that information from the universities and the research centers and provide research-based education to residents throughout the country. So that's what we do here in Collier County. And our program areas are specific to the needs of this county. So if you're from another state or another county, they may have different types of programming. But the ones that we have here, sustainable food systems, which is agriculture. You think about agriculture as food all the way from the time even before it's grown until it makes it to the store and to your table. What else? Residential horticulture, commercial horticulture, 4-H youth development, Sea Grant, which is marine science and natural resources, community resource development, and coming soon is family and consumer science. So you'll hear more about a couple of those. And I do want to introduce our faculty for the symposium today. So when you hear your name, stand or wave or whatever you feel comfortable with. Jessica Riles is our Sustainable Food Systems Agent for IFAS Collier County. Tom Becker, Residential Horticulture Agent, IFAS Extension Collier County. Where are you, Tom? Oh, there you are. Rich Dittman, he's our Master Gardener Volunteer Extraordinaire. He's on our panel today. Dr. Shimbo Wu, he's Associate Professor, Environmental Horticulture of the Tropical Research and Education Center in Homestead. So one of those research stations that I mentioned. And Nick Huey, Director of Collections, Naples Botanical Garden here in Naples, Florida. So you've got a full, exciting morning. Some shout outs to some other folks who are here. Where'd she go? Dr. Hamatal Cohen. There she is. She's our commercial horticulture agent, IFAS Extension, Collier County. We've got the Collier County communications team on camera and audio, Tom and Troy in the back, so they're helping us save this for posterity. I'm not sure if it'll be late night viewing maybe on the Collier County channel, but we'll have it to share on our YouTube channel as well. Master Gardener volunteers, please give me a wave. Yay, all right. I see more that aren't waving at me, it's okay. And Deb, she is our chief barista today, and she's keeping the lines full. So if you need something, look for Deb in her apron. And our Master Gardeners, we couldn't do all the things we do without our Master Gardener volunteers, and so they're a special part, an integral part of our team here at Extension. And let's see, also we've got orchid enthusiasts with us, and we've got friends with us, so that includes all of you. So we're really glad you're here. Now, everyone should have a folder. Some of them look a little different, but they all have the same content. So on the right-hand side of your folder, you have the vanilla cultivation in southern Florida. It is a scientific, we call it an EDIS document with University of Florida. And this little 8-page number is pretty much the holy grail of vanilla orchid status right now in Florida. And this was just updated earlier this year. And you'll notice that Dr. Wu's name is listed as one of the authors. So that's a great little document to have. And you can also find it online. But we wanted you to have it. I've marked them up. You've got a Southwest Florida Fresh brochure, an initiative connecting local growers to people who want to make sure they buy local things. And then on the left-hand side, you have your agenda. Oops, wait, there's one other thing on your right-hand side. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. Nope. Here it is. Here it is. The little vanilla orchid hand pollination model. So you'll have a chance to use this because you've got great imaginations. But we'll use this in a little while. And then on the other side, you have your Vanilla Orchid Symposium agenda. So we'll stay right with that as best we can today. And let's see, you've got 2 evaluation forms. So evaluations are an important thing because it helps us with our funding, because cooperative extension is actually funded federally, state, and local. So it's a cooperative effort. So it helps us in our reporting. And then the other one, the survey, this helps us just do a better job. Let us know how we're doing so we can continue to improve and bring you the programs that you'd like to have. And so you want to know where these are, and be sure to fill them out for us, please, because on your way out when you leave this afternoon, you're going to get a couple of things. Some parting gifts. So you're going to get a little vanilla planifolia orchid. This cultivar is called a painter. They're certified virus-free. They're grown in Florida. And we got them when they were much smaller pots. And so we repotted them in these 2.5-inch pots. And they're growing nicely. So all of yours will have some new green, and they're nice waxy green leaves. So who says it doesn't pay to turn in your evaluation? And besides that, you'll be getting this it smells wonderful, this wonderful vanilla soap, handmade artisan soap, not just any soap, and these freeze-dried vanilla ice cream. They look a little different because one's like French vanilla and one's natural vanilla, and it does have the label on here. And these are both especially special because our 4-H team, they created them. So let's see. You've got a Sunshine State vanilla, nourishing vanilla hand cream. I got to tell you, it's the best you'll ever find, and it's not like you can buy it in the store. We had to order these special, and it's actually the same entrepreneur, you'll hear from her today on video, who grows the vanilla. And so she does aromatic products. And then this one, this is going to be really the theme of the day, so I need to show you now. Drum roll, please, Tom, Jess. Ta-da! Vanilla orchids are fun. All right. So you'll have those, and I think you may have another little something in there as well. Oh, and I think you'll have a card from, oh no, you won't. No, never mind. Never mind. You have a card on your folder from Jessica Riles. Jess is our program sponsor today of this program. Okay, what else? Anything else? Yes, I can't forget the vanilla-themed snacks you have today. So with your coffee, we've got vanilla creamers, we have hot and cold vanilla teas, and they're kind of labeled. You'll look for the clues. You'll see what flavors they are. Infused water, and then a yogurt parfait bar. Of course, the yogurt is vanilla. We have vanilla granola, and then we have some little granola bites, and we have some oatmeal vanilla cookies. It's okay. Whoops. That means I have 1 minute left. But I'm not gonna need it. Something else I want to mention that we'll put out a little later. Dr. Wu brought us some special chocolates they made with the vanilla extract from Homestead, and so we'll have some little tasters out. I think we'll be putting them over here a little later. Okay? So remember, vanilla orchids are fun. And please give a great Collier County welcome to our first speaker, Dr. Shimbo Wu. So you can pull this out if you want to walk around, or if you want to lavalier, Tom or Troy will get it for you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Hey, how's everybody doing? I would like to work around. So, today I'm going to talk about the vanilla history. I'm going to give a lot of talk on vanilla breeding. So, my name is Shimbo Wu. I'm assistant professor from University of Florida, Tropical Research and Education Center. So I was hired actually as an ornamental breeder. So I started work last year, January, where I had a 1-year overlap with my former colleague, Dr. Alan Chambers, who used to run vanilla program at UF for about 4 or 5 years. And ever since Alan's departure this year, earlier this 2 months ago, so I was appointed to temporarily take over the vanilla breeding program at UF. So I'm like everybody else who is still learning. So my main focus is to breeding ornamental varieties for the ornamental industry in Florida, specifically southern Florida, where we have a big tropical foliage. But I have to admit, we have a lot of nurseries that are also interested in vanilla and other kind of orchid. So I do all the way through traditional breeding to the plant biotech. My main focus is to do genomic and genetics development, which I believe the Mother Nature really gives us a lot of natural relations where we can integrate those into a breeding program. So that's a little bit introduction myself. So this is what you find from Publix, Walmart, where you find everything about vanilla, which you kind of see it from here, where we have coffees and all vanilla flavors, which is great. And do you know that over time, starting from 1816s, that gradually Mexico and Indonesia and Madagascar becomes the main producer of vanilla, while U.S. becomes the #1 importer of vanilla. So all of the vanillas right now actually is 18% of it's produced in Madagascar, where farmers will have guns to protect their asset. And when the beans are cured and processed, they will be shipped all the way to U.S. for processing. So this is the agro-system that is currently in Madagascar. This is how the vanilla, most of the vanilla that we have, they extract from the beans. Beans are growing from here, and it is still now they supplies 80% of the world's vanilla consumption. A little bit of history. So it was back in 1670s where vanilla was discovered around Caribbeans and then go from west and also east at the same time, and they meet each other at reunion and where the Madagascar state nowadays. Around in Florida, we have around 1900s, early 900s, and we start to have in southern Florida that people grow bananas mainly by USDA scientists. And later on, which I will point later, is then it goes to the Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico used to have a huge vanilla production back to the days. This is Ernest's botanic notice of vanilla. That was back to 1600s. This is for all those of you who read Spanish. So you can see the descriptions. And the first description that vanilla was being used in chocolate. So it's now we have been using this ever since. This is the first vanilla image. This is Plantfonia andros. I have this in my office, which is really cool. I was drawn in early 18s. So in the New World, it's very important to Aztec people, lobels, because people back then think flavors are everything. So they think this has herb remedies and all the magics that we want. And it mixed with cacao and other spices and actually cultivated by Teutonic people. Spanish conquistadors are actually the main distributor. So when they went around the world and start to distribute vanillas and start to grow them. In Europe, was particularly in France, was they were the first people who figured out how to artificially pollinate vanilla. The people used to just smell it and see the flowers, but don't know how to pollinate. So around 1836, those are actually in the literature. So those were first achieved artificial pollination. And later in 1841, this was done by Edmond Abios in Reunion, which is use a, you go to the dentist, and the dentist will use this kind of sticker to press your tongue. So this is how they use to pollinate vanillas, and it has still been used right now in Madagascar. So, and this is back then how the vanilla was produced and processed. In the U.S., as I mentioned, in the early 900s, so those are all documented in the agriculture experiment station. This is in Honolulu, where they had a vanilla production. So I read vanilla culture in the Hawaii Island. Account of planting about 8,000 cuttings of vanilla in the region of Kola, Hawaii, where it is believed the climate is especially suitable for this crop, of course, tropical, right? And in Puerto Rico, it's middle 19th. This is what I mentioned. This was actually sponsored by USDA back then, where they have a huge vanilla eco-agriculture production system, as well as producing a shade house, where it was actually not set up in a large scale, and they have their packing and the curing process. Those are images you can find from USDA website, and this industry was wiped out later on by paludism, which is a particular disease, just totally destroyed this crop. In the U.S., in Florida, the person who really bring all the materials to Florida was Galloway. He brought in around 1906, 07, 08. He brought a different kind of vanilla Plantfonia as well as a Pompola to southern Florida. So, Jessica, what happened? There we go. Thank you. So nowadays you can find. Let me make sure I didn't press the wrong thing. Okay, you can find the vanillas that has been naturalized in, especially in the Everglades, where this is Planfonia vines grow up on a tree, and we have some natural pollinators that actually can pollinate the beans. So those are naturally cured beans that we found in near Everglades Park. We have 4 species in southern Florida, and the Planfonia are naturalized here. We also have Fiense, Dianiona, and Barbellata. Those are considered as ornamental type of vanilla because for its very special flowers. We also have Mexicana, which is very beautiful. That now I have it in my office, so I love it. I went those very fast because I wanted to play this video about the vanilla collection that we have in at UF. Some of you may already see all those early botanical notice, all the images. Probably you type online, you will find a vanilla history already. But what we are doing at UF is specifically wants to move this special crop and bring this crop back to US, and not to become the first importer, but also become a domestic produced vanilla. And this work was initiated by Dr. Alan Chambers, who was my former colleague at Track, and now he's steering his gears into another career. But he had this great idea and started to collect germplasm. The history is great, but what we should focus is nowadays. So I want to spend a couple minutes just to play this video to show you how many different vanillas that we have and how diverse they are. Start from 320. Yeah, that right there. Yeah.
See that the plants are still able to set fruit, and so here are the beans. They're not the largest beans, but they are being somewhat productive. Of course, we think that without the virus, the beans would be larger, the plants would grow faster because they have more energy that isn't being wasted on the virus itself. This is vanilla pompona. It's not commercially approved for food use, though it is consumed in parts of Central and South America. This species grows really well in Florida. It's hardy, it's vigorous, and the same size vine for starting for vanilla pompona will produce 1 year sooner than vanilla planifolia. If you look in here, you can see the size of the beans. Pollination, if it's pollinated well, these beans are much larger than vanilla planifolia. They're thicker. You can tell the species apart generally by the lighter green color of the species. That's somewhat diagnostic, as well as the thicker leaves and the thicker stems. As we work our way through the collection, we'll see a number of different species throughout here. Here's another vanilla pompona. This one is somewhat sterile. It produces only a few pods and mostly very small pods. The yield is very low, so this would be a risky type to produce, even if you were trying to produce vanilla pompona commercially. This succession here is the one we call Daphne. This is the one that we sequenced the genome of. And as you can see here, it's a bean-producing plant. It's got a nice green color. It has a lot of vegetative material compared to the amount of beans on it. But this is a great genetic resource for us to use to figure out different biochemical pathways that might give us larger beans or better flavor beans. This is vanilla barbellata. This is one of our native leafless species. You can see the beans here. These beans came from flowers that were pollinated over a year ago. So we're interested in the length of time it takes to go from flower to bean. And this seems to be one of the species where the beans are just extremely long-lasting on the vine. We don't know why that is, or what quality the beans might have other than that. But it's a difference that we've noticed, and we're excited to see what potential it might have. This is Vanilla imperialis. This came from an orchid collector. Vanilla imperialis is nice because it not only does it have a large size, it also has very thick and large beans. This one is not approved for food use, but this is one of the rare vanilla species where the flowers last longer than 1 day. So we've noticed that flowers on Vanilla imperialis in Florida will last and look fresh up to 7 days before they close and decline. So the flower is also extremely beautiful. It's got some nice red color to it. It opens full. So this might have ornamental value for southern Florida just for orchid enthusiasts. This is an interesting vanilla species. We're not quite sure yet if it's a hybrid between Vanilla planifolia and Vanilla pompona. We know for sure that it has Vanilla planifolia in its background, most likely its mother. But it does produce these massive beans. They're extremely long, they're thick beans, and the plant is actually producing much sooner than we would have expected it to based on being planifolia alone, given our conditions here, our environment. And so this is one that might be an interesting upcoming star for future production in southern Florida. This is Vanilla planifolia painter. This is the type that we're recommending for commercial production in South Florida. One of the reasons we like this plant so much is because of its extra large beans. And so it's a heavy producer. We get a large number of beans per raceme. The beans are a large size, and the vanillin content we found for the previous growing season was around 3.5% on a dry weight basis. So this plant, it grows well in southern Florida. It does well in the environment. It propagates easily, and it's also virus-free. So this is one we're looking again to propagate, to get out to commercial growers, to see how it does on a larger scale. These are two examples of actually what we're looking for a better type of plant for southern Florida. So in terms of production, we want more of the carbon in the plant going towards bean production. So both of these plants here have less vegetative material, so less stem, leaf material, and more beans per plant. And so this one, you might have the same number of plants in a given area, but it's going to put much more energy into the beans itself. The beans are a good size, relatively decent yields, and again, virus-free material. So these, again, might also be interesting for commercial cultivation in southern Florida. We have 4 native species of vanilla in southern Florida, and this is another one of them. This is Vanilla deloniana. Extremely popular such that it's been illegally over-collected in natural areas and is no longer thought to exist in these natural areas. We have a permit to work with this in our collection. This can be owned as long as it's sold by a nursery that is licensed to sell endangered species to make sure that we're not exploiting our natural resources. One of the reasons people like this plant so much is because of its pretty red flower. It also has a nice aroma to the flower, which is desirable, though bean quality is nowhere near what you would get with commercial quality because it's a non-aromatic species in terms of the bean. So it doesn't actually taste like vanilla, but it is a pretty ornamental type of vanilla species.
I have 3 minutes. All right. So yeah, this is what I want to show. This again. Pointer don't work. Okay. Anyways, so any questions? Yes, gentleman there.
He mentioned there were a couple varieties that were not approved for food. You can use them as vanilla in food. What do you mean? Is it just, what does that mean?
No, not varieties. It means species. So right now, only Vanilla planifolia and Vanilla tahitensis, which is a hybrid between Vanilla planifolia and Vanilla olorata, are approved for food for vanilla extract. The beans are produced. Other pomponas, babalas, they are not approved, so it's illegal to extract vanillin from those beans and sell. So these are legally defined by FDA. Yeah, though pompona is like Dr. Aaron Chamber mentioned in the video, pompona is widely used in South and Central America. Used as aromatic, same like planifolia here. Yes.
Which species would you suggest for home growers?
Oh, home growers, I would suggest you get anyone that you like. It's really depends on the flowers, and if you're interested in beans, I guess later on Taylor was, yeah, right. She will teach you how to pollinate them. I think the trick will be how to pollinating the flowers to be able to have beans. Yes.
What about the flavor of the vanilla? I remember buying, especially in Europe, we had like
So there was not a lot of mention of the quality of the vanilla bean in the end. I mean, other than some don't taste well.
Give me an hour, I will have a very long, boring presentation talk about this.
I have a question about the USDA approval. So the Pompona and the planifolia, the planifolia is not approved by the USDA. I mean, the Pompona.
It's not USDA, it's FDA.
I mean,
FDA. So this regulation was made, I believe, was 1960s. I have absolutely no idea, which I don't think, well, I shouldn't say this, but anyways, so I think it needs scientific evidence. I think back then people just don't know. For example, when they defined vanilla planifolia and vanilla tahitensis, it's actually, tahitensis is the hybrids. Now we figure, which I will cover later on, it's hybrids between vanilla planifolia and vanilla odorata. So I think back then it's just not so much, people don't know much about the species, and they haven't done really a lot of work just for the safe measures, so they legally defined as this. But it can be, you know, this could be some directions we can work in the future, because we have found so many good traits on Pompola that can be integrated into new cultivar development. Yeah. How am I doing on time? I think that's my last slide. Oh, I'm gonna, yeah, that's a lot of hours, so.
And now, thank you very much, Shimbo. And so you'll be hearing more from Shimbo in a little while, more details, and have opportunities to ask more questions. So thank you for doing that. And please welcome Nick Huey from the Naples Botanical Garden.
I'm a pacer too, so I think I'm going to take this off so I can move around a little bit. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me today, and welcome. So, good morning. So I am the Director of Collections at the Naples Botanical Garden. Has everybody here been to the garden? Hopefully, yes. Good, good. Oh yeah, recognize a few people out here already. Well, good. So I'm the lucky one that's in charge of all the plant material there. So from the vanillas growing to the flowering trees to grow on, that's all under my responsibility. So I've been a plant collector, a gardener, orchid grower from about this tall. And so it's always been something that's been part of my life. I've always worked at rare plant nurseries. I got a botany degree from Michigan State University. And then since then, I've worked in numerous horticulture institutions, including the American Orchid Society. I did work there when there used to be the headquarters in Delray Beach. And then I've been at the Naples Botanical Garden since 2013. So today, obviously, we're talking about vanillas. And I'm going to touch upon some of the stuff that has been discussed already, but a little bit more detail just on growing in our backyards, just as a homeowner or as a gardener. And so I'm going to touch on a few different varieties that we have in the garden, a little bit of pictures on how things are growing in the wild as well. Propagation also, which luckily is pretty easy, at least vegetatively. So vanilla in the wild. So orchids occur worldwide, and a lot of orchids, though, will only occur like certain genuses in certain regions, but vanilla is one that actually does occur worldwide, except for, I don't believe there's anything in Australia, but as you can see in many of the locations throughout the world, there are different species of vanilla. And I'm once again take close attention to that it really is defined to tropical regions. So vanillas do not typically grow in cooler habitats. They are a tropical plant. So roughly, depending on which source you look at, up to 110, 130 species naturally occurring. So there's quite a bit of variety. As you saw on the slides earlier, quite a few are in collection. And I've visited other collections, including Kew and other places that have some pretty spectacular vanilla species. So it's a lot of neat plants to explore and collect, and I'm sure a lot of that research will go into that as well. Zoomed in a little closer, so we look at Florida, and we have a very close relationship to the Caribbean. So because we're southern Florida, and especially for our garden, we really focus more on the southern Florida and the Caribbean versus central Florida, northern Florida. We have a lot more in common with the Caribbean, and so a lot of our work is focused throughout the Caribbean region. And especially as climate is shifting and temperatures are warmer, we're really looking to the Caribbean as plants and that can do a lot better in our region, especially since there's already so much overlap. And because of that, a lot of these tropical plants that occur in the Caribbean have made their way to southern Florida. So we have a very limited region. If we look at kind of this, and I'll blow it up in a minute, but kind of this area around in here, you can see the proximity of the Bahamas, Cuba, Yucatan. And so through wind currents and animals and things like that, we've got these small habitats in southern Florida that actually can house some of these tropical plants. So we're really at that northern limit of where some of these tropical plants can occur. And then, of course, you have all the northern plants kind of working their way down here. But over time, it seems like this is probably going to shift further north as we watch, as the climate adjusts a little bit. A little bit closer here, you can see some of our natural areas and where some of the vanillas that were mentioned earlier do occur. And once again, you can see they really occur in these habitats that are really in the southern tips and areas that are more associated to wetlands and areas that have a little bit more protection. So to zoom in on the vanilla phantha, so this is our closest species to where we are right now. This one occurs in the Fakahatchee Strand for the most part. Here you can see it growing in the swampy location here in a slough. It was affected pretty bad by the cold we had, 2010, around there, 2009-10. But luckily, it's been recovering very nicely. I get the chance to go out to the Fakahatchee very often on numerous projects, and I've been watching the vanilla vines out there over time, and it's been pretty nice to see them growing, flowering, and setting fruit. And here you can see one not too long ago. This may have been about a year ago. But here you can see how many are getting naturally pollinated out in the wild. So when we look at the Fakahatchee Strand, this is really the kind of the most biodiverse region in South Florida for your epiphytic plants, your tropical plants. And why is that? Once again, I mentioned because we're kind of that northern extent of a lot of tropical plants, any tropical plant that's in South Florida really has to get into a certain habitat to be protected from all the extremes that Florida has. So when you think about cold snaps that blow down from northern Florida, just one bad cold snap can really set tropical plants back. Certainly fires, drought, different rain patterns can affect them as well. But really, the cold temperatures are usually the one that does most of our tropical plants in. And so how do the plants kind of beat that system? They have to occur in areas that are protected. So kind of looking at what's underneath everything here, you can see the water underneath. So that's really where you find the best biodiversity of epiphytic plants, is where you have that deep water in some of these deeper slough areas in the swamps. So we have that natural sheet flow that comes through Florida. It floods the forests. You'll have the strand swamps, like where your cypress trees and things are, where you have shallow water. But then you have these deeper sloughs within that. And so that's where you find your other trees, your pond apples, pop ash trees, and really your concentration of orchids, bromeliads, vanillas, things like that, rare ferns. And so the longer that hydro period, the longer that water is sitting underneath those trees, the more protected it is, and the plants can survive longer. So you can imagine during the summertime, that water is cool, it's humid, so it's protecting from any kind of heat that we might be having come through. During the wintertime, all that muck and that water is retaining heat, so during the wintertime, it's actually a buffer from the cold. So on either extreme, it's helping the plants kind of beat those extremes and be able to get through our weather. And typically fires, fire is a normal part to our Florida ecosystem, but typically some of these deeper swamps wouldn't burn. Fires would get close to them, but they would stop typically. It's only an extreme dry event that fire would actually make it into some of these deeper sloughs. So all these things are helping protect these plants to be able to survive. And then, of course, there's other limiting factors, things like pollinators and things like that might be more common in the tropics that we don't have. And just as a side note, some of our native orchids have actually adapted to become self-pollinating. So not our vanilla that I know of, but some of the other orchid species actually do self-pollinate just because of that limiting factor of the pollinators not being here. This is another one of our native species, barbellata. So this is one you can find typically more coastal in Everglades National Park and down through the Keys. It's kind of neat to see. As you can see, if you know your trees well, you're looking at a mangrove tree. So these are some of the mangrove swamps, and you'll see these vanilla vines just kind of creeping and crawling over the tops of the trees, along with some other epiphytes and tillandsias and things like that. But a pretty neat vine and very, very hardy. Here you can see the seed capsules forming here. They get this really pretty orange coloration on them. And actually I showed a close-up here looking at one. Here you can see this kind of green, this little ooze coming out, and then you can see the little black specks in there. So there's the seed coming out of that. I think it must have been a little insect hole or something there that was squirting out of. But vanilla, unlike most typical orchids, most orchids have airborne seed. So it's this dry, dusty, they're almost microscopic, real small, and they'll fly in the air and land in the tree branches and associate with their fungus on the tree branch or the ground if it's a terrestrial. Vanilla is not. So vanilla is typically in some kind of like paste-like material, or you can see this one here that's in almost like a gel-type substance. And so it's probably the distribution mechanism for this seed is a little bit different than most typical orchids. So it could be an animal coming to kind of lick the seed pod clean and then spreading the seed that way, or if a bird or something gets to it and kind of wipes its face on it and then wipes it in other areas is one possible way that the seed's spreading naturally. Just another species, this was in Cuba a couple years ago. I came across this just growing in a dry forest. It was right in the northern coast of Cuba. So once you get into the tropics, that protection of the water and kind of those extreme environments in Florida, it's not quite as needed because, the cold snaps and things like that aren't going to hit, typically like Cuba and some of the Caribbean islands. So this one's growing just in open dry forest. Not sure what species it was. It wasn't in bloom, but this was just a very small section. This was covering a massive area, going in and out of all the branches and things. So that's a pretty neat thing to see in the wild. So vegetative propagation. So growing from seed is certainly is done in the lab and is much more difficult. But most people that grow vanilla will grow it just through a vegetative cutting, and it's luckily quite easy to do. So any plant is able to be propagated, any vanilla plant, by cutting that are in our collections. But there's a number of things we want to be careful of when we're cutting plants and doing cutting. Certainly, as mentioned, virus and things like that are probably quite common in vanillas and also our other orchids in our orchid collections. So we just want to be really careful anytime we're cutting orchids not to go from plant to plant to plant using your cutting utensil. Typically, you want to either use like a disposable razor for each plant if you're going from a couple different plants. We can also sterilize plants with, you can even use a blowtorch and an old clipper and get it real hot whenever you do your cuts, but that's a little bit more dangerous if you're not comfortable using a blowtorch. But typically, using a disposable razor is usually the easiest thing to do, because that way it's clean and it's not going from plant to plant. But a couple key things to notice. So here's a cutting of a plant here. So all the action is going to be happening at the nodes. So that's where your leaves, your new roots, your flower spikes, everything comes out of these little sections here. So when you take a cutting, you want to make sure to at least have a few of those nodes within your cutting. And this is a smaller cutting, but it still worked. This one just has 2 of these nodes here. And in here, you can see where the cut was made here. Typically, you want to make your cut and then let it dry for a day or 2. You really don't want to put a freshly cut cutting into your potting mixture, because that can introduce fungus and other things getting into it. So you want to make sure that is calloused off nicely and is able to stop anything from penetrating into the cutting itself. And then as you see here, the lower leaf was removed. So when you have the plant in the potting material, sometimes if that leaf is still stuck on, that can also rot away and invite infection. So it's usually best to pull that leaf off too and then let that dry off as well before planting. And then here you can see that the new growth, or the roots came out of that existing node here, and then a new growth comes out at the top here. And this would probably be about the minimal size cutting. Might be better to have a couple nodes when you're doing it, but this would probably be the minimal size. It'll still work, but it just might be a little bit slower. Or you can take a tip cutting as long as you give it enough of the more mature foliage on it. So the tip cutting would already have a new growth growing, and so that might just be a little bit quicker rather than having to wait for a new one to come out of here. And once again, here you can just see where the new roots emerge from. So as this plant starts to climb, it's going to send out these roots to either go down to the ground or grab onto whatever it's growing on. So here just showing some of these cuttings here. So that was the initial cutting there, and then here's a new piece going up here. So I will have to say it can sometimes be confusing which way is up on a plant. If it's growing this way, it's kind of easy, but the vines, are kind of going all over the place, and the leaves will twist themselves to the sunlight. And so, will a plant grow if you put it upside down? It will, but it's usually just better to make sure you're going upright. So the best thing to do is just look for that little kind of cup right here. So if that leaf was flipped upside down, just follow the leaf back, and you can see, so that should be facing up right there. If it was flipped upside down, there would be a little bit of a twist in that. And so that way you can see which way the plant really does want to grow. But once again, it'll correct itself. When you see the pictures that we've shown, the vines will go up and down, loop all over the place. So it can correct itself over time. For potting material, really anything can be used. I typically like to use more well-draining orchid mix just because I know it's clean. And also it's well-draining, so just to limit rot. You can use different, this is just an orchiata mix. Another mix I've used, we do have a pine bark mixture that we have that has a little bit of compost in it. I've grown the vines in that too, and that seems to be pretty good as well because that does provide some extra nutrients. But that's usually after we've rooted the plants. For actual rooting, I would recommend using something that's a little bit more clean and sterile just in case for that chance of infection. Another close-up here just showing the new roots emerging. So if there's nothing to grab onto, those roots are kind of just going to keep growing until they find something. If there's something right here for it to grab onto, it'll wrap around and use that as an anchor to grow up. And same cuttings. So from a small cutting to a plant that's a couple feet tall can happen pretty quickly once that plant is actually actively growing, as long as it's a healthy plant overall, not virused or sick in any way. So it's almost like stand back. Once they get going, they're fast, and you can almost watch them grow, and that new growth is emerging. So we can translate that into growing into the garden. So once again, you can do a similar way. You can start them in a pot or put them out, or just start them straight onto a tree in your backyard or whatever you want it to grow on. So one of the keys and one of the mistakes I see most often is that a lot of times people will take the cutting and put it into the tree branch itself, as you would another epiphytic orchid, and that usually will fail unless it's a really strong, vigorous vine or a big piece. The best way to do it is really to start them at the base of the tree and then allow them to grow up, and then they'll put the roots down. The vanillas really like to have roots that do tap into the ground. They're kind of a semi-epiphyte, semi-terrestrial plant. So they will typically have, even if the vegetation itself kind of disappears over time and is up in the tree canopy, you'll still have roots that are going down the tree branches or dangling in the air and tapping into the ground somewhere. And you'll actually see that there are different types of roots. There are terrestrial roots and epiphytic roots with the vines. So when we do this, we just want to make sure that the plant is strapped in well, so it's nice and tight. Zip tie is usually the easiest thing to do. Zip tie it on, and then typically just would lay the cutting with those nodes, at least one or two nodes on the ground, and then you can just lightly put some mulch or something like that on top just to protect it a little bit. And then once that new growth starts going, it'll start going really quick up the tree. So as mentioned, vanilla pompona, you can see what it can do over time, how quickly it can grow up with something in colonize. This was actually at RF Orchids years ago. But here you can see a nice fan palm cloaked in vanilla, a pretty neat cousin-it looking thing. Another one mentioned, Vanilla imperialis, definitely one of my favorites too. It's a gigantic vine. This was in my backyard actually a few years ago. If you were to look at my plant now, the stems are almost as thick as the microphone here, so it gets real thick stems, giant leaves, and beautiful flowers, which I have pictured in just a moment. But it's an African species that does really well here. We do have an orchid vanilla display in the garden, if anyone's seen it. We built these trellises in our Caribbean garden to showcase vanilla, and rather than have them, we do have them in the trees all over the place, but the flowers might be 20 feet up in the air. So here we've lowered it down a bit so you can see the actual plants and the flowers and the vanilla beans close up. Unfortunately, the hurricane wasn't very nice to this. We actually lost the one big tree here that was providing the shade to the whole structure. So we've had burlap covering it until recently, and we just actually moved a bunch of new big coconut palms that we had in another part of the garden that had to get moved. So we've got our potential shade back, and we'll be uncovering them and replanting some of the vines back on here. But even so, with all that abuse from the hurricane, and it got flooded with salt water here too. But this one here, actually, it does have producing vanilla flowers right now. So despite having burlap thrown over it and going through the hurricane and getting in full blazing sun, it still did okay. Another close-up of another species. So here's showing some of just the anchoring roots. So some of the anchoring roots won't really grow much more than this. So that's just its way to climb. And then you'll see other roots that make their way down to the ground, that tap into the ground. And this is one of the leafless species. It has an initial leaf, but then those leaves fall away. And a common name for these are worm vines. So I did mention, cold damage. So we are, once again, kind of at the extreme limit to where some of these tropical plants can occur. So we will see cold damage. And this is what kind of minor cold damage looks like on a plant. The good news is minor cold damage, the plants can usually grow through it pretty well. So the most sensitive parts of the plant are the new growth tips. So if you have fresh new growth tips that haven't hardened off, that's what usually gets damaged first. And the plants are typically pretty good at compartmentalizing that damage. So they'll basically die back to whatever node was kind of more mature here. And then it stops. And then once you get past the cold and back into the growing season, you might get a new growth here or back another node or two that starts to regrow. And then you never know anything happened. Certainly a major cold event, it might kill it back further. But typically the cold damage is fairly minor. But certainly once we start getting into any kind of 30s or, we kind of had that weird cold snap this year that was never really got that cold in the 40s, but it was like 3 days of it. In those cases, you might want to protect them up their plants a little bit if they're in an exposed location. And I have noticed the vanilla Tensis is more sensitive to cold than the vanilla planifolia. So I don't know if it's the odorata that's in the background of that is more tropical, but just from my observations, it seems like that one is more sensitive to the cold than the planifolias. So I'm going to talk about just a few of the common species that might be in your collections or that you might see sold in stores or plant shows, and just to elaborate on a few of these a little bit more. So mentioned multiple times, the pompona. So this is the one that's definitely in collections the most in South Florida. Most people that say they have vanilla typically will have this species. It does get confused sometimes with planifolia, and so usually when folks are asking questions about it, and first I need to kind of figure out, well, do you have planifolia or do you have pompona? And typically it's pompona, but it is a great grower for our environment. It's robust, it grows fast, it's pretty tolerant. I wouldn't plant it in full blazing sun, but it is tolerant of higher light. And once again, it's a plant that gets passed around quite a bit from collection to collection just because it is a vigorously growing plant. But its flowers are distinct. They're much larger than planifolia, and they're typically more of a yellowish color. And this whole area here is much more filled out. The planifolias, so you see them sold in nurseries and things, some of these variegated forms. I'm not sure, maybe the genetics can talk about it. They're sold as variegated forms of planifolia. So there's a white variegated one, and then I think actually over here there's this one that has kind of that yellowish variegation in it too. But once again, the commercial variety, I don't think I need to elaborate too much more on this one, but this is a little bit more sensitive, especially this white one. If anyone's had this white one in your collection, this one for some reason is definitely more cold sensitive and a little bit more finicky than the typical green varieties. This is kind of a cool one that you'll see at orchid shows quite often, Vanilla aphylla. So this is another species that's a leafless variety. So once again, it does have leaves at early stages in its growth, but then those fall off eventually, and then it just has a green stem. But here you can see if you got a healthy plant, it can bloom on every node, even old nodes like that. So you can get, and you can see in the picture here, just flowers going all up the tree. And they're pretty little flowers, and it can be in bloom for a prolonged period of time. And once again, a pretty easy grower. So this is one that's readily available. Most orchid shows, big like Redland orchid shows and things like that, you'll see them for sale. And it's an Asian species. So as mentioned, the Tietensis, the hybrid that was mentioned, so the other one that can be sold as a commercial vanilla extract. So these are ones that we, actually through Alan Chambers and his contacts, so we received some cuttings of these that were certified. The true thing, that's one that, Alan was saying that are typically sold online that actually aren't the real thing. And so he was able to get someone that had the plants, they were able to test them, certify them, and they were made available. So this is the real deal here. And so ours have been blooming for the past couple seasons, this season, last season. I'm not sure if it's typical, but ours have bloomed kind of randomly throughout the year. We have some blooming now. We had some blooming a couple months ago, so I'm not sure if that's typical or not, but it's a great plant, very vigorous grower. So once again, the only thing I did notice is that it is a slightly more cold sensitive, but other than that, it seems to be a great plant. And some of these are becoming, I know I've seen these at some wholesale nurseries down in Homestead, so I think some other folks were able to order from the same vendor, so these might become a little bit more available now. So once again, Vanilla Imperialis. So this is probably one of the my top favorite species, as mentioned in the video before too. Absolutely beautiful plant, huge, robust. Here you can see the flowers. Those flowers each one of those is about that big. And you can see just real vivid color. I looked at mine a couple days ago, and there was a similar spike like this. This was maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago I took this picture. But you might have 10, 11 flowers open at one time on each cluster. And so there's multiple clusters of this and my vine hanging off. So it's awesome plant, and they last a long time. And so this is a highly recommended plant if you can find it. I'm not sure if I've ever seen it for sale. I think my original piece came from Denver Botanical Gardens many years ago. But it's in numerous other collections. But if you can find it for sale, I would definitely get it because it's pretty amazing. Vanilla Barbellata, so we mentioned this earlier, so it's a close-up look at the flower, but once again you can see Barbellata is also one of the leafless varieties, so it drops its leaves, and it's basically just a green stem until it flowers, and you can see a nice pretty little flower. And so that one was also the one I showed earlier, growing in the mangroves in Everglades National Park. So probably the next, this was mentioned in the earlier presentation too, Deloniana, so another one of our natives that may or may not exist in the wild anymore, but it is in collections. So this is one that gets just an absolutely gorgeous flower with that real nice vivid kind of purpley color at the edge. It also is a leafless variety, so it looks very similar to the Barbellata when it's not in bloom, but it's a vigorous grower. Mine in my backyard, once it started blooming, is consistent, and I don't know, mine's probably about 40 feet up in a cypress tree, and I probably get, 50 or 60 clusters like that coming out of it. So it's real pretty when it's in full bloom. Back to Vanilla Phayantha. So this is the native species that I mentioned that grows in the Fat-Catchy Strand. So it produces a giant flower. I think it might be the largest native orchid flower in Florida. It's a very large flower, about that big. If you look the side view, kind of around the lip, and this kind of section back here is kind of blown up almost like a balloon, and it's white. So it's fairly distinctive looking compared to some of the other vanilla flowers. But once again, a real pretty plant. Vanilla Phayantha is sold in plant shows and things like that too, so it is available. And it's another one that does grow fairly vigorously in the garden. The last one, this is one I picked up a year or two ago in a plant show. And so far it's been doing well. It hasn't bloomed for me yet, but that's a picture I got offline. But here's a plant in our orchid house. But a much more distinctive looking plant, more of these kind of rounded leaves like this. And I've had it both in the greenhouse and outside, and it seems to be doing very well. So another one that's worth getting if you can pick it up at a plant show. And I think that was my last slide, so thank you. I did want to mention that, actually, if anyone has been to the garden lately and seen our new construction, here's an early vision of it, but we actually have these structures being built as we speak right now. Some of the actual structure itself is already up. So this will hopefully be online at the end of the summer or early fall. So these are brand new greenhouses and horticulture facilities that we have at the garden. So we have big propagation houses, orchid and conservation houses, shade house, potting lab, our potting building. We're going to have a new micropropagation orchid lab. So that's going to be inside of our shop here in a sun nursery. So pretty exciting stuff for us. And then I don't have a picture of it, but we actually do have an off-site facility that we've been working on at Littman Farms. There's about a 5-acre covered greenhouse that has sides that can open and close, top that can open and close, that where we've been doing all sorts of different projects, some of our community tree projects and other things, but we are going to be setting up a small vanillary there. So we actually do have a couple hundred of the painter variety of the vanilla plantifolias through Stephanie, the person that was mentioned that was doing the vanillas. And so we're going to set up a small grow area there for this. So we'll have a nice little experimental plot of the vanilla vines growing out there. So more to come on that later, but other than that, I think I'm done. So thank you. Any other questions? Direct sun, if it's limited, like in the morning, it's okay. But once you start getting to that afternoon, late morning, afternoon, full blazing sun, and if it's on them for a long time, they'll start to yellow out and eventually get damaged. It depends a little bit on the species, like the barbellata, the Deloniana, some of those leafless varieties can grow in pretty bright light. The vines will discolor a little bit, but that's normal. They'll kind of turn a reddish color, so those seem to be a little bit more tolerant of higher light. But some of the larger leaf varieties definitely appreciate shade during the hot part of the day. Eventually they will branch, and sometimes that terminal growth or the growth at the end will terminate and stop growing, and then it can eventually will branch out. But that piece itself will typically, if you got that fresh grow tip, it'll continue growing from that grow tip. But if that part's been pinched out or stops growing, you can get branching off of one of those nodes. Yep. I don't typically use, you probably could. It might not hurt. I would assume it would react to that, but they seem to be, as long as you got a healthy piece, they seem to root fairly quickly on their own. So it's probably not necessarily needed.
Any particular tree that's better than another to attach them to?
So I have found that vanilla will grow up basically anything. So I've had them growing on pure glass and stick to glass. I've had them grow up metal containers. They're pretty non-selective on that. So I think the main thing would just be the amount of light that it can eventually get to. So if it's extremely dense, ficus tree or something, that vine's probably gonna have to get pretty high up into the tree where there's higher light to bloom well. It may not bloom in real dark shade. So they don't necessarily want to be growing in full blazing sun, but they do need bright light to flower properly. So typically a good airy tree that allows good light through, but a little bit of protection is ideal. But as far as sticking to it, they'll pretty much stick to anything. The far back. So we don't induce, but they do have their own time. But as what we've been noticing with everything, that the flowering has been kind of weird just across the board with trees and everything. This year it seems like a lot of our vanillas are blooming at the same time. We have a lot in bloom now. Other times it's been a little bit more seasonal. Many of the species are more spring blooming, so the springtime here is kind of the general range of when they will be blooming. But as I mentioned, I've had the Tahitensis blooming at odd times throughout the year. But some of the more, like the plantifolias and pomponas and things like that are usually springtime.
So you said that you showed them growing in a slough, and then you said they had to be planted at ground level, so they're going to be in the water.
They do have roots that will reach down into the water. So depending on, they will typically start in like a raised hammock area, or you have like little tree islands within the swamps. And so that's where they'll generally start. But once they've started, they can go wherever they want. So they'll grow into the tree canopies. They might lose some of the older growth that dies back. And they kind of crawl around. They'll send roots down into the water. They'll find sable palms and other things to put their roots into. So once they're actually been germinated and growing, they can pretty much be anywhere. But it's typically, at least what it's thought, is that they've germinated in some kind of humusy area, or these little tree islands where there's a buildup of soil and things like that.
We have yours growing in a cypress, which you would prefer over an oak simply because it doesn't have as many leaves to cover it so that there's more light.
Yeah, the cypress, that's what I had in my backyard, so that's what but oaks are good too. But I mean, oaks, depending on the age of the oak, can be a little bit shady, but once they get up into the upper canopy, they'll probably be okay. They're just going to be, they might be harder to access.
You just mentioned the sable, so they can grow in the palm with those.
Yep. Yeah, and sable palms, the boots of the palms, as long as you leave those boots on, are actually good places to grow a lot of epiphytic plants. Those boots hold on to a little bit of nutrients, and there's mosses and ferns and other stuff that grow in those. So those end up being really good habitats for a lot of things. So yeah, you'll see the vanillas, they'll put their roots into that thatch that's on the palm, into the boots, and then kind of get into there, and so they can be quite vigorous in a sable palm.
When they're that tiny, can you put them in the ground, not little? If they start in a pot and grow?
You can, but there's always a risk when you're if it's something really small, just because there's animals out there, and lubber grasshoppers will chew on them, snails will chew on them. So you have to be, if you have things like that in your yard, you want to watch out for that if you think that's a risk. But as long as it's a healthy plant, if you can cover it a little bit, it's probably okay. But I mean, it is a more controlled environment if you can grow it in a pot first and get it actively growing, and then it'll establish faster.
Well, I probably did the wrong thing. I have it growing up with trellis. They're probably maybe this high, and then, but they're little. So should I leave it there for a while and then move it to a tree?
Yeah, I mean, that works too. I mean, you can, once it's at the top of the trellis and starting to get past that trellis, you can just put that whole plant against the tree and then strap it a few times just so those roots are right against the tree. So that way they can grab on. And then that new tip, you just want that new tip to be kind of pulled right against the tree. And then it'll find its way and start rooting on, and then...
Can I move it off the trellis? Can I pull those roots off or no?
You can, but you might break some of the roots doing that. You can just leave the trellis on and wait for it to grab on, and then remove the trellis later too.
Just cut the trellis off?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if I cut the trellis.
Yeah.
Gotta hurt the trellis.
Yeah. In the way back.
When I'm growing them up and down my trellis, they get pretty big pretty quick, so I'm wrapping them around again. Should I be cutting them off and starting a new plant, or just keep wrapping them around?
Yeah, I think in higher intensity growing, and this might get mentioned later too, but it is the process to loop them. If you're trying to keep them like on a smaller trellis, at some point it does become too much. So you can remove some of the plant if it becomes too crazy. And if you remove some of that vigorous new growth at the end of the season, at least from what I've read, that might encourage flowering in the spring too, to kind of slow down the active growth. But yeah, I mean, if you have one, eventually they get gigantic and thick. So I mean, thinning them out is okay. Yeah.
All right, so there's several things we want to talk about with pollination. So we're different types of learners, and we learn things different ways. Some people are really auditory learners. They learn from hearing. Some people really learn from seeing, and some people learn from doing, and most of us are a combination. So I think I must be a big combination, because I watched videos and I tried to pollinate vanilla flowers, and I didn't really have success. And then I watched Rich pollinate, and it's like, oh, now I get what you're talking about. And so then when I pollinated them, it took a little while to get the feel. So don't feel like you've got to get this on your first try. And the reason I feel like I'm getting to talk about this with the support of Rich here is because now I have pollinated just between February 28th and the end of March. I attempted pollination on 91 or 92 pompona flowers, and I've got 65 beans. Woo! So anyway, that's why I'm qualified. I'm not a horticulturist or a botanist, but I'm that far anyway, and been growing orchids a long time. So Jess is going to show us first some video on how to. She slowed it down because some of these, I mean, it's not even 20 seconds. It doesn't take long. And when you think about Madagascar and the hand pollination there, the people there, and they tend to hire women, is what we understand, because of smaller hands, and they can zip through and they pollinate hundreds of orchids in a short period of time. So Jess, why don't we go ahead and watch these first. There's no sound, so we can talk it, right? Okay.
Do you want to show the Trek one first?
Yes, yes. So let's show the clinical one first. So this is kind of a side view. So when you're looking at the plant, the flower on a plant, it doesn't quite look like this, but to give you an idea of the part, it just showed the membrane that goes between the pollinia and the stigmata. And so this rostellum is the key. So what just happened is the rostellum got moved out of the way. That's the membrane that separates the pollen from the stigmata. And that's it. So, I mean, there you go. Okay, you got that. So here it is, kind of the anatomy again, shows the side view, the piece in the middle, yep, the rostellum. So that's the membrane that keeps things separate. It has to be moved out of the way to pollinate the vanilla orchid. So the goal is to move it out of the way and then put your pollen and your stigmata together. So we're going to show you some other ways. Pollinate early before noon because the plant flowers are more viable, and then be gentle. Okay, now we're going to show you some homegrown ones of Rich actually doing one and me actually doing one, I think. So this one I'm doing, and I broke the flower off. I've already cut, or I've kind of modified the flower to make it easier to get to. This is the top of the lip, and the lip on an orchid is a modified petal. So here's that rostellum. It looks kind of like an inverted heart. With a toothpick, just lifting it up under the pollinia flap, also called the anther cap, and gently press it together. Voila. Now that one will never pollinate because it's broken. But that's the idea. So hopefully you can see that. And just slowed this down a lot. All right, so here is Rich. And he's just kind of sliced the lip for easy access. See how he's trying to move that petal out of the way? All right, and he's going to take his modified, he made a fancy toothpick, modified to move that rostellum, hinged it up out of the way, and the whole point is then he can put the pollen, the pollinia flap, down on the stigmata. Voila. Hopefully a pollinated flower. And we're going to be looking at how you know if you've had success or not. So that's success. Those are flowers. Each one of those is a bean, a new bean, and they're coming. And that's the vanilla pompona. The flowers are a little bigger, so it's great practice. And I understand that it does make great vanilla extract. It has a different flavor, but of course it would not meet FDA standards for commercial production. So lots of beans, some of my 65 beans on the plants. And all of these, again, are pompona plants, backyard growers. And these are grown, I've got some on an arbor, and some, these are on the arbor, and then some on a pergola. And I started mine in pots on the bottom, set them at the base, and then they grew up. So ideally, if this were commercial production, you would go for about 10 beans per raceme. That was the cluster of flowers, the raceme. And I've read in the publication that we gave you that the lower flowers make straighter beans, which are more commercially viable if it were a commercial production. So you're getting a part of the tour here, so we're coming back to the pergola. And these plants have been on a long time on this pergola, probably close to 8 or 9 years. Originally, they were from my mother in Fort Myers, from her plants. And again, pomponas. All right, so some of this we're going to recap in this PowerPoint, and then we've got a little bit of show and tell. Oh, I forgot to set my timer, Jess, so you'll have to let me know when you're ready for us. Okay. All right, so we're gonna walk you through this PowerPoint. So kind of some review. Oh, I'm the one who has to advance it. Wait, I can't do two things at once. I think multitasking's overrated. All right, so why pollinate vanilla orchids? Well, there's lots of reasons, but I like to say, why not? So we just learned and saw some of the vocabulary, the botany vocabulary. So that pollinia flap, so it protects, also called the anther cap. The pollen is located under there. The rostellum, that kind of inverted heart shape, other people call it different things, but I'm going with heart shape today, inverted heart shape. So that's the membrane that you have to move out of the way. So you mentioned some things seem to be self-pollinating. So is that because the rostellum, the membrane, has been modified over time? And is that something that genetically that may be looked at Trek, what Dr. Wu is working on that project? How do you get a self-pollinating, viable vanilla? So that's more to come. So that's all, your specialty on the genetics. And then the stigmata, that's the female part of the plant, also called the pistil. And once the rostellum's out of the way, the pollen is exposed to the stigmata. Okay, like we said early in the day. Now, some will last longer. You mentioned the Imperialis, and they last for several days, and they are lovely. I got a small piece a couple years ago, and it's just now doubled, but it's bloomed like 5 times. So, and it's puny, so I'm excited to see it grow. All right, so the first thing is we modified that flower lip, and the lip is a modified petal. So on a vanilla orchid, you have 3 sepals, and actually most orchids, 3 sepals and 3 petals, and the lip is the modified petal. And so it's the top of the lip, or the less fluffy part of the lip, and you want to pierce it just to get more access. So this is where Rich is the master of this. And you can even, that bottom part, the fluffy part on the bottom, you don't need that anymore, because that's not the part you're going to care about. But don't be like me and break off the flowers, so be gentle. Then the toothpick, or your sharp instrument, or modified, you're going to lift up, and you saw it, you just lift up the rostellum, and then I find it helpful to hold it out of the way, because it will flop back down if you're not watching sometimes. Some do, some don't. And then you just gently press, the pollinia flap to make contact. So this is what helped me, looking at Rich, go through the process more than once to get the idea. So I got to tell you, we've been excited every time we've had a bean out here. So how do you know if it worked? Well, normally, a non-pollinated flower, if you've done nothing to it, or if it didn't work, the flower's going to fall off in a couple days, with a day or two. It just falls off. But if it pollinated, it stays on, even though they look kind of dark and ugly, but they'll stay on for weeks, potentially. So you'll know, like day 3, you'll have a pretty good clue. Also, the stem that held on the flower starts to swell, so you can compare it with another one. And so it becomes obvious once you start looking. And then those swollen stems, those are the beans. So for commercial production, they like to wait 8 8 months, some of them, although there's some ways they're trying to speed it up, but 8 months to really mature and have the good flavor for the bean before it's used for the curing process before you make extract. So you get to love your beans a long time on the plant. So Rich, he's out here on Tuesday mornings. He really does a great job in our extension demonstration gardens, keeps things looking wonderful and pristine. And I'm just so glad that you've been partners in crime with me on these orchid projects that we've been doing. And then I can be reached here by phone or email. Okay. Oh, and our disclaimer. So I did want to mention, could we turn the lights up, Tom? All right. So Rich, would you get your model? So Rich is going to talk you through, we were talking the other day, what we need is a good model, because just looking at the flat pictures doesn't help that much, right? So we're like, well, what about a 3D printer? And then trying to find somebody with a scanner and a printer. So Rich made something really cool.
Wow. As I was taking out the recyclables, I had a plastic water jug, and I looked at the handle and I said, boy, that could be a vanilla orchid. So a little cutting here and there, and basically this is what we come up with. So this is the basic of the flap with the pollen. This is actually the male part. The female part's on the bottom here, and this is the flap that keeps it from being pollinated. So as we take, and whoops, it's a little tougher on this because a regular flower is very soft. So as we lift that up, we can just pull down the flap and pull out the toothpick, and we should have pollination.
Exactly. So that's a beautiful model. So anyway, take a look at that, and go ahead and get out your paper model. So anyway, Rich is very creative and brilliant coming up with that. So this is a little bit kind of flat. You can use it, you can practice, and here's your pollination tool right on the card. So it's labeled for you, the 3 parts. So that rostellum is the one in green. So I want you to do this with me. You ready? So you're going to pollinate. It may not be your first, but some of you, this may be your first vanilla orchid. You're going to take the rostellum, just move it, and then the anther cap comes down, and you press on the stigmata. There you go. Everyone have success? Are you growing beans? Okay. All right. So it kind of helps to visualize it in different ways. So we've actually just exposed you to several ways on pollination. Over on this table, so you'll see Rich's model, and there's a flat version of an educational piece on the steps on how to pollinate a vanilla orchid. A couple examples of vanilla orchid. There's the variegated one, planifolia on the right side, and then 2 others in the pot in front of it, and just a little piece of vanilla pompona. And then the larger one on the left, it was a gift a couple of years ago, and so it was just on the totem, about that tall, and then it wanted to grow. But I didn't want to put it under a tree. I wanted to watch it. I don't want it to be up high, since you know now I like to practice pollinating flowers, but I'm not exactly sure what variety it is or species it is. So it may be a planifolia, it could be something different. We really won't know, sort of, until we see the flower, and then we wouldn't know for sure unless we had it DNA tested. So anyway, I hope you'll get a chance to look. And also over here, Deb had cut up the chocolate that's made with the vanilla extract that's been produced at the Tropical Research Center from Dr. Wu. So if you have more to talk about, so we've got little tiny samples, and we hope that you'll try Dr. Wu's vanilla chocolate. Okay, so let me see. So the next thing up, oh, Rich, was there, yes.
What pollinates them in the wild?
I would say vanilla orchid pollinators. Right? And it could be, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I've got my horticulturist, my botanist, my experts here. But it could be an insect, an ant, a hummingbird, a bird, something that's moved that pollen off that anther cap.
Like some plants have specific pollen.
I'm not sure how specific it is. Oh, he's going to talk about that. Yeah. Good, good. Phew. Okay. All right. Yeah, ask the important questions to the experts. I'm sorry? Question. Oh, yes.
Yes, is there any issue with viral transmission when you're pollinating from one flower on a vine to another vine? Virus. Yeah.
Good question, yeah. So, this is something that we're trying to avoid, is in the memory that whenever we do it, we like disinfect our hands and wear gloves, everything, because that's how symbiotic virus transmitted, mostly by touch, genital touch. So especially when you're trying to pollinate and across the plant.
But on one plant, you're okay, but,
Once you get in one plant, it's hard to get out.
okay.
Yeah, good question. And the good thing is, toothpicks, you can buy hundreds for not a whole lot. So that's a good point. All right, let's see. So this next piece, we wanted to take you on a tour. And Tom, our horticulture agent, our residential horticulture agent, and he works with our master gardeners and Florida Friendly Landscape, has done a beautiful job in enhancing the design of the garden. And we wanted to take you all on a tour, but it's kind of hard to get everyone through in a short period of time. So that's our attempt right now. I'm not sure if Hollywood is calling, but they may be. So Jess, if you'll show the tour, please. I'm Twyla Lee, County Extension Director in Collier County, and we're with the University of Florida IFAS Extension.
And I'm Tom Becker, and I'm the horticulture extension agent, and I work with Florida Master Gardeners, and we have a garden surrounding the extension office, a garden that we use to display 100 different horticulture crops, including vanilla orchids.
We're talking about vanilla orchids today because we're working with the University of Florida's Tropical Research and Education Center in Homestead. Our scientists and experts there are looking at the best types of plants and cultivars to use in the production of vanilla extract. And in order to make vanilla extract, you have to have vanilla beans and a quantity of vanilla beans. So we're very excited to work with them on this project and also help our landscape homeowners do the best they can with growing vanilla orchids.
Tropical America has hundreds of different vanilla species, and we chose to put 3 in our display garden. One of them, Vanilla plantifolia, is the one used to extract the vanilla bean that we all enjoy in cooking. The other one that we have here is called Vanilla palma, and that one is completely ornamental, looks beautiful as it vines up a tree. And the last one we have is a native vanilla species, Vanilla delineana, and when we say it's native, it's been found in Florida, and it's been naturalized and will grow in the wild. And because of that, it's extremely endangered, and it would be illegal to take it out of the wild.
Exactly. And Tom, good explanation. I know it may be a little bit tough to see on the camera, but we brought a couple others in. This one is the pompona that you had mentioned, the ornamental one. You see a lot of this in the landscapes, and we have them here. But you can pollinate the flower and make beans. And so we've heard that the extract is very good, but only the planifolia and one called tahitensis can be used for commercial vanilla in this country. And there's also a little small planifolia in this pot. And just for variety, that one is a vanilla planifolia, and it happens to be variegated. So it could still make those beans, but it's an interesting leaf. So besides potentially being very commercially viable, they are a beautiful plant. Oh, and one of the reasons is because right now over 80% of the vanilla beans that come into this country to be made into vanilla extract are from, where was that country?
Madagascar.
Madagascar.
It's a long way from home.
It is. So if it helps our South Florida farmers and it also decreases the environmental footprint, it's a win-win for everyone.
We're really fortunate. We're in South Florida, which is one of the few places in this country that we can grow these, not only under shade houses, but here in the outdoors.
So well how these roots anchor into the oak bark. Those are actual roots across the lawn. And this is 2.5 years worth of growing. And we have a bean for something.
We're ready to move our small seedling into a larger pot. This is a 2-inch pot, and we're going to put it into a 4-inch pot. And I'm first going to just put something, this wonderful Spanish moss makes a wonderful base so that you won't have the soil fall out the bottom holes. And then I've created this, there it is, soil mix that's high in perlite. And that becomes the basis for the soil mix that this plant continues to grow from. And it's a matter of just making sure that the plant is a well-drained soil and in a place where it's going to thrive so that there's no pests that are going to be attacking it. So we wanted to keep it in a container until it gets a little bit larger, and you obviously want to water it right away.
Tom, why wouldn't you just put it in a big pot?
There really is too much soil column for it to stay dry enough and drain well. In this case, it's going to drain much more quickly, and there's no chance of rot developing at the base.
So stay away from too big of a pot. Now,
You can always move this into a larger pot.
as it keeps growing.
It keeps growing.
Okay.
Right?
Now you've got some other mixes here. So this is the one that looks similar to what you've got for small plants. That's nice. And I see an orchid mix, and I see 2 different types of mulch. Can all of those be used?
Yes, they all can be, but we found that those that are put into predominantly soil and perlite, and this is what perlite looks like, gives us the best chance of these taking root quickly. And you might get aerial roots, you might get terrestrial roots, but it's the terrestrial roots that provide the quickest support. So what we're going to do is just mulch. This is flora mulch, and this is just protecting the soil, keeping moisture in for a longer period of time. And You also could use this mulch that is a blend of wood fibers and cypress.
Okay, very good. So I noticed at Trek, they mentioned they use a lot of mulch on their larger plants. So,
Yeah, and the Melaleuca mulch would be the most identifiable one here in South Florida. And it's the most obtainable, and it's a recycled material from Melaleuca trees.
this is a vanilla bean off of the vanilla pompona vine. It's about 4 months old since we pollinated the flower, and we got a bean. Down the path here in our gardens, we have more vanilla pompona vines. Did want to mention that this is a wonderful landscape plant. If you don't already have it in your garden, you might want to add it. And it's a great potential crop for small farmers and can be very financially worthwhile for them. So
And
Tom.
remember,
So Tom is a great horticulturist, and he's been in extension for, I think I heard you say 38 years, and he's been with us the last several years. So if you have questions for Tom, he would love to show you the garden if you have a chance to walk through it today, or please come back during the week. We're open 8 to 4:30. And Tuesday mornings are always the most exciting for me because that's when our Master Gardener volunteers are working. All right, and now, let's see. We're ready for Dr. Shimbo Wu. And he'll be talking about plant diseases and the research breeding programs. And you may have other questions for him.
Yes, yes.
And if you want a clip on, we can give you a clip on.
That's fine. Thank you. Hello again. I bring this piece of paper so I don't forget some of the questions I'm supposed to answer. But if I forgot, please remind me. I also have my timer here so I don't go over time. I'm going to talk about some of the research that we're doing at Track Homestead, where we're trying to domesticate this vanilla species to build an industry where we can produce vanilla beans and domestically and add a lot of special crop as agricultural commodities for southern Florida. So again, this is what I covered already. Nick has did a great job explaining all the species that we have, but the take-home message here is it's not a stranger. It is native and it is well adapted. It's a tropical crop. So, and I also explained here, so U.S. right now is the #1 importer of vanillas and vanilla beans, and the biggest production is in Indonesia and Madagascar. So, and vanilla is the world's most popular flavor, natural and even synthetic. So you go for yogurt, you go for ice cream, anything that you can find in the store has almost all of them has a vanilla flavor. And I had a trip last year, went to Virgin Island, and there's a brewery there talking about vanilla beer as well. So So there, but however, it's only 1% of total vanillin from vanilla beans, which means all the market, all the product is only 1% that actually it's vanillin extracted from vanilla beans, because the rest are either synthetic or extracted from other crops. It has a very similar kind of aromatic characteristics as the vanillin you extracted from vanilla beans. So it's a Mesoamerican origin where it's really into our growing our climate, and it's spread globally starting 1500s, which I covered in the previous slides. And Florida, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico each had vanilla by 1900s. So it transitioned from Mexico in 1815s and then went to Madagascar, and it's kind of have a big industry there. So for us, it's really a new opportunity for Florida, where especially in Dade County, I don't know how they post here, but in Dade County, we are losing our agricultural lands, and everybody is looking for new crops to grow to keep the agriculture there in specifically tropical areas. So why natural? Well, why not, right? So it's everything that in the past, it's a consumer preference, and it is also a lot of synthetic and also class action. Now also it's against the alleged false advertising of food products, which you don't know, you get most confused for a lot of people. And in France, you find people claim this is a vanilla, but it's actually the beans that has been already extracted. The vanilla has already gone, and they still sell the beans and claim it still has vanilla inside. So this has been reported all over the news in the past few years. And really, those are all the reports. Take-home messages in the recent years, the whole take-home message is that especially during COVID, the price of 1 pound of vanillin went between 250 to 600. So it's really very expensive. It's second most expensive spice next to saffron. So as you can imagine. And this is a rough calculations that we have a lot of, we're featured for our strawberries and tomatoes and blueberries. But if you take just not to consider the input, but everything that can bring you raw revenue. So it's really a great crop that has a big potential for southern Florida. And we have diversity, right? We have all kinds of beans, different species. We have seen natural pollination going on, where it indicates a potential to become auto-pollination, which means either through eliminating the rostanum or through the social bees, whichever you cover later. So, which means you reduce the labor. And we have many flavor quality based on research. We find that we have all the peaks you see is a different aromatic characteristics that can be integrated food, which means the different compounds you extract from different accessions or cultivars may smell different. It's the flavor, the vanilla can be used not just for food, but also aromatic, like perfume industry. So this is a rather big business potential that we are seeing. And we've seen yield, we've seen different big variations based on the beans, the length and the weight. So those are very important in terms of plant breeding. And we also seeing reduce the time to flower, which adds to a larder imperials, which can flower 7 days. This is something that's also very important, because right now you have to pollinate your vanillas before 12 o'clock, before long. Otherwise, you can pollinate in the afternoon, but the rate is really low. So it's better. What we did is usually around 8 to 10, and that can ensure your pollination rates. Despite all the good things, but vanilla was never domesticated. Even we're talking about the vanilla planifolia here, or pompona, or any of the species, those are wild. Those are all collected from wild, and people start to grow them. Even in Madagascar, those are wild collected plants. Or they find this is have a very favorable flavor, and they start to vegetable propagate it. So it was never improved. Not as the maize. So this one is called Teosinte, and this is our modern, becomes later on combined with our other ancestor and made our modern maize. So that's where you see corn grow everywhere, and this is what was its ancestors. So it was improved. There's also the apple. This is the wild species of apple, and this is how breeder works with the wild species of apple and becomes and have the different kind of apples you see in the supermarket. And this is diploid banana. This is the ancestor of the bananas, and breeder made it the commercial bananas that we see. So without, you can't grow those, right? So it has too many seeds, as you can tell here. And this is carrot. The wild carrot is just a weed in the field. So you can have this, it's not poison, right? But you won't have something like this where it lies. It can fresh or anything that you can use for your kitchen. But for vanilla, no. This crop was never bred or never being improved, never being studied in the past. So anything that, as mentioned, anything that is is produced right now is still raw. They take it from the park or take it from the forest. They start to propagate, vegetable propagated, and harvest the beans. So for the breeding program, we target several traits. One is the yield, of course. You know, to be able to have enough supplies for the whole industry to get into the flavor business or the food business. You need to have a good production. Some agronomic traits, for example, here, we sort of cover this is fancy. Like fancy lever will stay, when you pollinate the beans, will stay there for a year long. They don't drop. So this is a lot of traits because that can give you flexibility when you can harvest it. So it's not very time sensitive. You can choose your time. You can harvest them whenever you want. You know, when you have a huge, large scale production system. The other is splitting. Okay, for some species we find, some not species, but within planifolia, some exceptions we have, they split on tips. Those beans who split tend to have a bad quality because the aroma is actually come from the inside where there's a certain layer of hair sort of thing wrapping around the seeds. That's where the vanillin come from. But if it's split and it's natural cured like this in the wild, you will lose the quality. And the other is disease resistance. So as I mentioned in the previous slides, that's how the vanilla industry in Puerto Rico get destroyed. Labor, right? I wrote here, people asked about rhododendron thing. So labor, the main labor right now is the auto-pollination. You all have the handout of the EDIS publication that we updated this year. In the second, I don't know if it's double-sided, on the second page when people are asking, okay, how many flowers can you pollinate? If you are really skilled at this and in the morning, one skilled person can pollinate maximum 215 flowers. So, but if you consider labor, so this is really a big cost over there. So this is a bottleneck that needs to be addressed by two ways. One, rhododendron is a conserved, I'm a geneticist, so pardon me if I'm keep using the words called treats. So this is what we call it. So it's a conserved phenomenon across many orchids. So this is in the evolution, that's how the Mother Nature forced the plants to have its diversity by cross-pollinate, not to self-pollinate. Because if you self-pollinate, your genetic diversity, you won't have that much genetic variation in the offsprings. However, if you cross-pollinate, you will have many kind of different ability to go against the environment changes. So this is conserved trait in orchid. However, in some, I think Nick mentioned in some of the orchid, they can achieve self-pollination. For example, there is a lot of endangered orchid called Bonidia. Bonidia can have, it's a terrestrial, and it can self-pollinate. So there is, I don't know, maybe over the past years, the environment has changed and it forces plants from cross-pollinating to self-pollinating. So there's something that relates to its genetic variations, natural occurred, so we can make this happen in vanilla as well, just for the sake of reduced laboring, right? So this is natural occurred variations that you can utilize and incorporate it into the breeding. Another way of overcome the production cost is through pollinators. Also, there was a question also asked about the bees. So in the wild, in the park that I'm showing here, we've seen, or maybe in your backyard, you've seen some of the bees were natural occurred. You'll never pollinate them. So most likely it is, in Florida, it's pollinated by a special bee. I can't remember the Latin name of it because that's usually not my interest. I'm not a geneticist, not an entomologist. But what I understand is that this bee has an issue, which is if you want to industrialize one crop through insect-guided pollination, this bee needs to be a social bee. When social means it knows where it's home. So, and this bee is semi-social, which means 7 days a week, maybe 3 days, this bee can go back home and 4 days sleep in somebody else's home. Okay? So it's not efficient. And we cannot use this in the industry. And you can't keep it because it's not a social bee, not like honeybee that we see. They always know where the homes are, right? In Mexico, we have some collaborators also observed some bees. Now we haven't, the way they do it is they just set up so many hives so the bees can go and naturally pollinate those bees. But again, it won't achieve a higher efficiency because to be able to have beans, you need to pollinate each single of your flower to have beans. So this is what we're looking for. And this may occur in other part of the world where they have maybe social bees that can pollinate the beans. However, there's also issue that this bee may be invasive in the US or in our environment. So we cannot import unless we did enough research about it. So there are 2 ways to do it. So I will cover later that we find Pine Island. We found potentially a lot of bees. So we set up a time course camera. We capture 10,000 of pictures. And we have a computer algorithm to analyze and to identify what exactly the kind of the bees that are pollinate this, and are those bees social? If it's social, then it's problem solved. Yeah, so, and the last thing, we are also looking at the flavor. So I believe somebody also asked. What? Point here. On the ceiling? Oh, yeah. So we are also looking at different flavors. Different accessions give different flavors. We have, say, vanilla in different caramel. There's all kind of woody and spicy and smoky. This is some are naturally occurred flavors from vanilla beans, but others are because of the way that you curry your beans and you extract them. We had 1 year, we had a vanilla extract that tastes like hard cardboard. So it's just because the way that you extract it it's not good. So we are trying to improve on that in that aspect as well. But I made sure that this year's vanilla extract is super good. It's FDA approved. So we work with a chocolate company. We made extract, they made chocolate. So help yourself and try some out. But I do want to point, I talked with Tom, or we have not found anybody is allergic to vanilla or vanillin. So I just a precaution there. It never happened before. So, but because we're talking about something about food, so we have to be careful. So this is how we do vanilla breeding. We pollinate the flowers. Then we have after 8 to 9 months, when the beans are, we see the tips are yellowish. We open the beans. We get all the little tiny seeds out in the tissue culture in the dark, so they can situate. And when we want them to germinate and we want them to grow, we will turn the lights on, and then it becomes greenish, which means they are alive. And later on, we'll put in the tubes, and a couple of months later, we put out in the growth chamber where it becomes a new plant, which is our hybrids. And then this is a little bit tricky. From this step to this step takes about 4 years minimum, because from seeds to the first flower usually take about 4 years and another 8 to 9 months to set beans. So this is very long time period. So we're waiting, and then just for the collection itself, we observed some of the hybrids that we collect. They have different flavors, different yield, which I will show it later. So this is a very long process, and we are already figuring out some of the ways to reduce the time by using molecular markers. Key traits we're looking at, one is obviously flavor. This is the big thing. This is all about vanilla is flavor. Then we also look at plant vigor, right? The plant has to be strong naturally, so if it's a little bit cold or a little bit too hot or too dry, they won't, it needs to be tough in that way. And non-splitting, big thing. Cannot be splitted, because any split beans will, any splitting will decreases decreases value. Disease resistance, this is another thing we're looking at. We have screened the Fusarium across our collection, and very interestingly, we didn't identify any plants that are really sick. So I don't know, maybe we're looking at not looking at the right kind of bacteria, but this is something we want to keep looking. But the heavy direction, the direction that I'm heading on is mainly in the symbiotic mosaic virus, which I will cover later. This is the big concern, and this needs to be addressed if we want to look. We are talking about industrial production. And auto-pollination, of course, that I spent some time talk about this already. So historical, this is how Vanilla tahitiensis was invented. It was just a bee came from, visited Vanilla planifolia and went to Odorata, or the reverse versa, and then the beans were set in the beans were set, and then it's get matured, and the bird came and eat the beans, or grab the beans and travel somewhere and drop it in the places where it's just suitable for a seed to germinate. Then that's why not you have the tahitiensis. So this is all by chance. Everything happened just by chance. So, and now you have tahitiensis, but all the tahitiensis that we have, all the different types that we have, we bought it from online from other countries. We all get different, they all claim they have the different types of tahitiensis. But the genetic study that we have, which I will cover later, is they are all identical. So, which means it is vegetatively propagated ever since the tahitiensis existed. Now what we're doing is we're going to do the same thing, but through hand pollination. controlled pollination, what we called. We know the parents, we know how they worked, and then we multiply it by tens of thousand times, and then we keep recycling them, and doing the same thing until we find the plants that has a better or different characteristics. For example, flavors, plant vigor, that's the things that I talk about covered in these slides. This is the vanilla roadmap at a UF track. So this program was started 2017, and now we're at 2023, so it has been a couple of years. So I made a few slides just to kind of walk through how we did in the past few years. Again, this project was initiated by Dr. Alan Chambers, who was my former colleague. In 2017, he started to build a venenery at Homestead where we just use a bed with a mulching. I have a trellis. We start to collect germplasms. And this is how we have right now. We have about 20 beds in a total of about 320 some accessions that across 27 species of vanilla. They all are growing very well. They start to flower in 2019, which means we have the first beans in 2020, and we start to evaluate them. So in 2018, back then we had 12 accessions from 23 species. So we did some genetic studies just to figure out, okay, what are the species those plants are. So we had Pompona hybrids, and Pornifolias, Odoratas, all the different species we talk about. Also, you see those are hybrids that we were not able to know its parentage, but we know that has some background of vanilla Pornifolia. It's just different than the species itself. In 2019, we start to do some research and outreach, establish tissue culture, hybridization, including some of the vanillin biopathways, and how to extract vanillin from beans. That, of course, we buy the beans from other sources. And we distribute clean cuttings and monitor vanilla growth in the vanillary. We did some distributing some growing and curing information, and that's where this is the handout that you have right now. And we start to test what are the potential disease and pests that we have. One thing that we used is the strip, commercial available strip, that tests for symbiotic mosaic virus. As I mentioned earlier, then later on we find out this is not sensitive enough because from as far as I know, there are only 3 races of symbiotic mosaic virus exist, and this strip, test strip can only detect one of them. So this is really an area that we need to looking into to have a more sensitive way to make sure the plants are clean. This is very important. We also did a survey of people who wants to grow vanilla and how much acres do they want to do, and what's interest in grow vanilla in Florida. Of course, we had some field days, trainings, and conferences, and such as this particular one. In 2020, we moved forward. We sequenced the genome of vanilla, which means some of you may heard about human genome. So we basically did the same thing on vanilla. We sequenced the whole genome of vanilla. We know exactly all the genetic code existing in vanilla plants. In vanilla Planfolia, we used Daphla, and vanilla genome is pretty big. It's almost the same size as human beings. So it's really a big project, and because we are hoping that this project could help us to understand the flavor and the production of vanilla in the future, to just set up some foundational database for the plant breeding. We also figure out the vanillin biosense pathways, how vanillin was synthesized in the plants. So we know what genetic variations, why it needs to a different flavor across different accessions. And we figure out, okay, there are 3 gene copy sets that mainly involved into this pathway. In 2021, as I mentioned, about 2019, we had our first set of flowers, so we start to hand pollinate them. Then in 2020, we have the beans. In 2021, our collection has increased to 422, and in a total of like across 27 species. And most of the plants cuttings that we got start to flower. So we start to have a lot of beans produced. We value the aroma and the flavor and everything. We also develop molecular markers where we can differentiate different vanilla plantfolia types. You see there are different clusters, means they are different in what level, that we don't know because we need to find their parentage. This is what it's for. And when people talk about vanilla plantfolia, for example, you talk about painter, you talk about daphne, we'll be able to tell you, so the molecular markers here. So we start to provide this type of service to some interest growers, because when they buy the plants, they have to know what exact cultivars they are buying. This is very important because if you buy it from online, like Amazon or Etsy, you don't know what kind of cultivars you are getting. And some of the plants may be even sterile, or they are not what they claim they are. So through the molecular markers, we'll be able to tell either this is true or not. This is the Tahitensis. As you can see, these are from different part of the word. The heterozygosity we highlighted here basically telling you how pure the two sets of chromosomes are. That directly in a real kind of conversation, this basically telling you if you self your flowers, how much of the chance you will have the hybrid that are related, like kind of percentage the same as your parents. If it is highly heterozygous, like 40%, your hybrids will in a way, it genetically will be very distinguished to your parents, even though you may look the same, but they are essentially not. So, and you will see some of them from Mexico are 23%, almost 23% of heterozygosity, which means if you self these plants, you may see a totally weird thing coming out, and it's totally different than its parents. So, so this is the work that we have been doing and trying to say, okay, how much genetic variations are we expecting if we cross the two plants or if we self them? And we want to create as much genetic variation as possible to see potential changes in flavor, in agronomic traits such as the growth habit and disease resistance. We also develop molecular markers to differentiate Tahitensis and plantfolia. We know it's same procedure when we get the samples from the commercial growers who wants to grow one thing, and then we run the test and telling them, okay, this is true Tahitensis, or this is what type of plantfolia you're looking at. We private this again. We private this kind of guidelines so the growers know what they are growing, and so they can claim when they have the beans, they can sell to the food companies who is going to do the vanilla extraction. All those is to make sure they meet FDA requirements, and that for consumers, that's all we care about. We also run HPLC, which is a special machine instrument that can detect all kinds of chemical compound within plants. We run the vanilla pompona, vanilla plantfolia, and vanilla tahitensis. All the different colors represent different species. All the peaks you see are different chemicals that from those beans, and this is vanillin. It is very different as you can tell from Tahitensis, plantfolia, and pompona, and they may vary in terms of the content. However, if you cross them, there will be a phenomenon that in genetics we call hybrid vigor. You will have a hybrids that has a highest vanillin as compared to their parents. So this is what we are looking for. So up to 2022, we had a first genetic phenotypic evaluation. We've done enough genetic work. We know the genetic makeup of it, but we have to know in a certain environment how these accessions perform. Does the specific environment has effects for its production? So we need to know that for the next step. Again, we did a very extensive, a lot of genotyping, basically looking at the nature, genetic nature of those accessions we had across different species. And we start to analyze, we have average bean weight. You see how the beans are coming, the variations of each accessions in terms of bean weight. Those, some of them are really, really high, some are really low. And also the bean length, we measure the beans, how long the beans are, because that's also another thing that is the commercial, the companies are valued. And most importantly, we look at the vanillin content of the accessions that we have, and as you can tell, they are also different. So we are going to continue doing this work for about 2 to 3 years, have a consistent data, then we start to make breeding decisions of what parents are we going to use to breed new cultivars. So the ultimate goal is to find a genetic marker that are associated with vanillin content. When we breed those hybrids, remember when I talk about, okay, one pollination can have thousands of seeds from them, but we are not going to grow thousands of plants because we just simply don't have enough power, and we have to wait 3 to 4 years to do this kind of work. So with the molecular markers that are associated with vanillin, the 3K genes that I just presented, when we have the baby plants, we will be able to use the markers to screen the hybrids even before they flower. So we know the genetic component of it. When we use the markers, we only choose those ones that are associated with those markers, which associated with the vanillin biosynthesize, will get rid of the other hybrids that we are not interested. So this will decrease our labor and speed up the process. Because the more the hybridization you do, the higher chance you're going to get new cultivars with high yield, vigorous plants, and something that can be valuable for commercial growers. So this is all about breeding. I'm going to briefly talk about the production. I think Twila and Tom already covered. So in a track, what we do is we primarily propagate by cuttings for each of them. We prefer with about 3 to 4 loads. We do that because we want the plants to flower earlier. The longer cuttings you're gonna get, the early flower you're gonna get. If you have a very short cutting, you have to wait for a couple of years until it's vegetatively fully developed. So it will gets into the reproduction phase. That's what we say when they flower, which means it's ready for reproduction. So it's clonal propagation. So but we made sure all the stock plants are virus-free. Unfortunately, we had a lot of plants, a lot of accessions. As I talked with Nick, that in the past few years, because you can't avoid, we have many people are interested. We are also doing those hand pollinations by ourselves. We are transmitting the virus. Even we did every safe measure that we can, but we can still see some of the virus symptoms are popping up. And it's not just symbiotic mosaic virus. By reading the literature, we know that at least 10 viruses that can exist in vanilla. So we need to make sure all the plants that we propagated are virus-free. This is very important for commercial productions because once it's affected by virus, then there will be regulations. First, you will lose your yield. Second, there will be regulations to control this virus, and you may get quarantined. So this is something that already happened in ornamental industry regarding pest. So this is something we want to do ahead of time. We secured 2 bamboos if we want to do any experiment, which I will show you later. But the seeds can easily be grown in vitro, which means in tissue culture. About the virus is the virus does not transmit it through seeds. However, as I mentioned earlier, the seeds, the hybrids, all the seeds, the plants grow from seeds will be different or distinct from parents. So you will be saying, oh, why these plants that grow from the seeds of produced by these plants don't look like same. They don't behave the same in some cases because it is how genetics works. So this gives really a lot of opportunities for new cultivars or all the things that we said, especially how do we handle the virus situations. That's that's a big question. We did production systems. This is basically the demonstration we had. We just use mulch and then this is we use painter clones. We grow in the track. We do irrigation experiments, see how much water it requires. We also do weight control. Weight control is a huge thing because vanilla plant prefers shade and it's moist. So you have a lot of one particular is ferns, right? Everybody loves ferns, but in production, it grows ferns, you get a lot of other pests in there. And you also have a lot of weeds to manage. Also nutrition. It is a very, I would say, because it's, orchids is basically self-sustained, but in a large scale, we still want to know what are nutrition requirement. If you want to produce, let's say, tens of thousands of vanilla plants, we need the fertilizer will be a big thing. So we are also looking at a nutritional perspective. This is the graduate students set the experiment in the greenhouse. We applied different fertilizers regimes, looking at nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. That's the main thing that we're looking at. So trying to figure out what are most important thing the vanilla needs in order to promote its growth. All of those are for big productions. But it will be also helpful for homeowners if we know what kind of plants, what kind of fertilizer we need for the plants, so the plants can be happy and flower to make you happy. So we also do controlled environment trials because in the past few years, I guess this has been always the case, always around January and February, maybe sometimes in March, we will have a cold front. And Nick covered this as well. If you have a big nursery, you want to avoid that because it will just destroy the tips, right? And then affect your production and all that. So we felt, maybe indoor production because essentially these plants like shade. So we can give it artificial lights and give all the environment they like, and they can grow to here and not worry about what's happening outside. So we set up an experiment inside a big container, and we set up a light and fertilizer study. That's essentially two big production systems, factors that we are considering in the indoor production. The different lights, what kind of light wavelengths, what we find out from the outdoor study is the red lights tend to promote the vanilla growth as versus to natural lights. So the white wavelengths, it's that has been published by one of our plant physiologists. So we dissect all the healthy plants and send it for analysis to understand the nutrient distribution across different plant parts, flowers, loads, leaves, roots, so we know what kind of fertilizer they need, and then we apply specifically that particular fertilizer inside the container, so it is not affected by weather or watering. Everything is controlled. So we hope that we can figure out this in about 2 to 3 years, because the growth, it tends to grow nicely, but we need a very long time period of data to support those.
This is inside the container. This is what we do. We had the lights up on the top, different radiance, which means different level heights. Then we measure the plants periodically, say its photosynthesis rate, say the plant growth, and also the weight of it. So this experiment will last about 2 years minimum. We can extend if it's possible, and then we'll be able to have a good idea of, like, at least nutrient wide. On the light side, we're still using white lights, but maybe later on we'll think about switching to red lights, as the data that we have right now is saying the red lights promote the growth of the plants. Solar panel farm potential. So this is another thing. Urbanization is not a surprise in Southern Florida already. So a lot of farms are gone, but we have a blessed weather, and FPL has set up solar farms everywhere. And then, we are talking about, the land is so expensive to rent. If they leave those solar panels, we can grow those shade-love plants under solar panels. So you have a diverse plant production system where you can triple and support the production, and make extra profit. So we also look at flowering, pollination harvest. This is the camera I'm talking about. We spot one. It was up on a tree, like Nicholas mentioned. Not here in Naples, but somewhere in Pine Island. We find one plant, Vanilla plantfolia, up on the tree that sets beans every year. We are so interested. So there must be a bee that know where its home are and know where the foods are. So we set up a time course camera and point to that flower. We take 2 years of data. It's all pictures, something like this. So it would take picture every 5 seconds during the flower season. So we are designing the computer algorithms to be able to really identify something different in the picture frame, so we know what kind of bees or insect it is, and then we later on work with entomologists to see if it is, again, if this insect is social or not. It has to be social, then we can use it for commercial production. And we look at the bean length and when to harvest. This is also important. You have to harvest the beans before it's split. If it's split, it will not lose, but it will significantly decrease its value for extract. We also see some accessions that never split. So we want to integrate those beans that are never split into those ones that has high vanillin. So eventually you have the plants that produce pods, never split, can last very long on plants when you can harvest whenever you want it. So this is the ideal plants that we have. This is a new cultivar we're pursuing. And once the beans harvest, you can remove the debris and clean the beans. You do a heat kill, basically blanching the beans in a very short time of the period at a higher temperature. And the sweating is really the most important thing here. This is the time where you actually activate the enzymes within the beans. So the enzyme will actually convert all the chemicals that I showed in previous slides into vanillin. That's how the aroma come from. So fresh beans, you won't smell anything. But once it's cured, after sweating, you can smell the aromatic thing. And then you gently dry it in a very comfortable temperature at about 30% humidity. It's very hard to get 30% humidity in Homestead. So for about 2 to 4 weeks, so we have to use some kind of special equipment to make sure the humidity stays that way. Now, over the past few years, we figure out the last step is very, very critical, the conditional part. If you don't do condition, so then
your beans will smell totally different. Your extract will smell totally different. So here I said put it 1 to 2 months, but now I'm thinking about let's do a time period experiment, like maybe spend to 1 to 6 months. And of course, you want to store it as short as possible and have the best aroma or flavor that you can, because storing in a commercial business also is part of the expenses. So we want to know whether the beans that are produced from accessions will have different time period requirement for the for the conditioning. Again, this is what we do. We measure all the things, and this is what we're looking at, the vanillin content, and across all the beans that we harvest from those accessions. Now we talk about the standard of identity, right? So I guess this is also the question that was asked in the previous session. So right now, I just look at Google. If you look at Google, this was defined by FDA back in 1977. So this has never changed ever since. This is good. FDA is trying to ensure the health of human beings. But back in 1977, people probably don't know some of the species, right? I'm pointing this because the Vanilla tahitensis is the hybrid between the Planfolia and the Odorata, but you see Odorata is not listed here, right? So this shows those are different expertise that the FDA people has than the plant taxonomist and also plant geneticist. This also gives the potential opportunity to develop new cultivars, because Nick covered that it's around 130 species around the world, and this is where the species comes from, right? In our particular evaluation, we always look at a Pompona, because Pompona has a different aromatic flavors than Planfolia. So if we hybrid them, we actually found some hybrids between the two species. It has a higher vanillin and a very pleasant flavor or aromatic characteristics. But of course, it's subjective because different people smell things differently. So we want to work towards this end to see if we can prove or if we can integrate this species, of course, through FDA into the breeding program, so we can have a better beans that smells very, very different and different products that for customer to choose. So this is really bring these special plants back to its origin, where these Mesoamericans. So we look at it, we have a higher diversity here. We work on different growers in South and Central America. We look at the different problems that they have. They send me pictures of whether it's disease or insects. Unfortunately, we can't receive samples for diagnostics. But right now, in southern Florida, in our vanillary, we don't find a big thing like Phytoserum, this is devastating. No, we don't have that. We only have is symbiotic mosaic virus. This is the big thing. We're trying to avoid, we've been telling the commercial nurseries who distribute plants to make sure your plants is free and virus free. Because we don't want to create such environment where if in the future this industry happens and people will just tour in agritourism or just want to randomly just transmit this virus and that has a bad influence to the business. So this is something that we've been closely looking at. And those, even though we can't receive samples, but we have the warnings from those regions where they produce vanilla beans, then we know ahead of we have a general idea what's going on. Then when we have our own industry, our farmers come to us, we know, okay, so this is the similar thing that we're looking at. The thing is with agricultural production, if you have just one particular, two particular, or maybe 10 plants grow somewhere in your gardens, you don't seem to have a much problem. But if you grow tens of thousands of them, you will have a big issue, because One, it's a huge population, and it lacks in the ecosystem, it lacks of its diversity, which means all the substrate are the same, so it creates a perfect environment, not just for the particular plants, but also for bacteria and fungus. If you have only 10 plants in a very spread area, the ecosystem is different. So the bacteria probably will not grow under such condition because it doesn't have a very nice and comfortable beds. So, but in agricultural production, this is super, super important. So we want to look out for that and try to consolidate this knowledge, I guess, and then put into a piece of paper where we can help our growers when they have such situation. So this is what we do. This is a handout that you have. So we those information that we've been keep updating. Of course, we are learning as well. So if we have found any issues, or we talk to certain experts some of the information are not correct, we actually go back online and update it periodically. So make sure all the information we give to interest groups are correct. And we also validate this information through our own research, because we are trying to moving forward with always from different perspectives. And we always talk to our extension specialists and trying to spread those knowledge, scientific-based knowledges as much as we can, to help homeowners or commercial growers. So I think this has been covered by Tom. So from the growing guide, what we find is 17% shade, which really the vanilla really likes, especially Planfolia and Pompona. However, I also sort of talk about, I find different accessions, they're always yellowish. So they stand next to their classmate in the vanillary. The other one is always green and nice, but this one is always yellowish. But they flower and they set pods as well. So I'm wondering maybe their different accessions has different requirements to the lights. Because after all, vanilla of all the orchids, they are chem plants, which means they do photosynthesis. They synthesize the carbohydrates the plants need at night, not during the day. So it's different than the most plants we see outside. So I think this is something very interesting to look at. Maybe there are specific light or shade requirement for different accessions, but that's up to debate. So I will look into that as well. About the shade, 17% shade, people say, 15% shade is also work fine. Well, yes, but for a massive production, it needs to be tested. What we have right now is about 70 to 75% shade. It's very good for the plants in general. But again, it may be specific for certain accessions or species. For example, leafless species, as Nick covered, it will just grow very well outside, right? So it does not have too much bad reaction towards the direct sunlight. We use the 6 inches deep of the mulch always, as you see in the previous slides. We renew the mulch every year, just to make sure the plants has enough substrate and they can keep the moisture for the roots, as well as enough for nutrient to meet its nutrient requirement. We do snow release, but mainly foliar nutrition. So we spray foliar fertilizer about monthly to keep those plants happy. So younger plants, we supplement a little bit of irrigation, but not too much because that will cause a root rot. So, and pollination is still hand pollinate. Now this is interesting. Nick, given the conversation I had with Nick or Tom earlier, the plants that I have, generally, Vanilla pompola already flowered at Homestead last month. Now we don't have any pompola that is flowering. It's all done. This 2 weeks is the peak season for vanilla plantfolia at track. So when you have 300 plants, you can easily see which species are flowering. So this is a little bit different, I guess, somewhat related to the environment we have here. It's a little bit different. It's just about 2 hours drive, but this is something that we observed this year. And the other thing that we observed is last year, the plants were started to flower in February, but this year they start to flower in March in general. So this is a very interesting fact that we are looking at what exactly trigger those different reactions. Because if you have a variation, flower variation within a week, that's understandable, but a month seems a little bit too long. And also, we also observed some plants, especially last year, they flowered around June. They flower again. So this is also surprising to us. We are just finding very, very interesting stories about those different collections that we have. So it's a work in progress. So I got to talk about this too. If you're a homeowner, you have a plants in the trellis. Let me see if I have this picture. I need to show this picture of. Do I have it? Do I have it here? Okay. I don't know if you can, the people in the back. This is a component we have. This is the first cuttings that we received about 5 years ago. Now it is so big and heavy, just crush the trellis. And it's very difficult to pollinate flowers within as well because you can easily break it. So this is something that you should consider when you grow plants. You have to think about in the future, how it's gonna happen. If you're a homeowner, you can just let it grow on the trees, but if you just let it twist it together, it's gonna be a big problem. So we try to prune it, but we haven't done any pruning because what we want is, I just talked to Nick about this, is we have too many accessions we want to take care of, and we want to try to move forward towards plant breeding where we want to have as much phenotypic data, which is the beans. We need the beans. So we don't want to train the plants and have some adverse effects on flowering, on reproduction. So we cannot gather enough data. Because later on, we want to move to a next phase where we have hybrids to put more effort into hybrids evaluation rather than taking care of the accessions. Then we can put in the accessions as a gene bank or germplasm bank. We can keep it in vitro just in case we need it. But right now, this is a lot of efforts to take care of this huge collection. I have 2 people full-time taking care of this vanilla thing, germplasm in the lab. So yes, so I sort of talk about the symbiotic mosaic virus and the Fusarium already. We have to go back and look at the Fusarium again, but symbiotic mosaic virus is definitely the #1 concern that we have right now. With that, I don't know my time. Am I good on time? Okay, yes. Any questions? Yes.
I have a few questions. One of the things is that the vines, they usually last what, for good, probably 3 to 5 years?
No, the vines will stay there for as long as you take good care of them.
Okay. So do you want to take clippings along the way to have secondary, stalks coming up underneath? So like, how do I explain that? Well, like if you have a big vine, it keeps producing indefinitely, the Asian vine? Okay, that I didn't know. I thought it had a time.
No. You will keep producing. The only problem is I was showing it's gonna get so big, so you have to take care of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so, but you can take the clippings and then.
You can.
Own stalk.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
And then as for somebody that's somewhere between a home grower and something, I have about 100 plants. Where is my best place for sources of things, like my shade structure, getting underway, shade cloth, that type of thing? whom do I reach out to gather the best information to kind of streamline my process?
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna.
72 plants coming in from Stephanie. I've got about 50 some, all different ages, so I need to move into the next level, and that's what I would love to do. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You said Pacer was a recommended variety for plantifolia. I mean cultivar.
Uh-huh.
Is there a cultivar recommended for Tahanesis?
Tahiensis?
Yes.
What we find is I showed the molecular marker kind of identity work that we done. We find that some of the Tahiensis are basically identical to each other. So right now, which means they are basically the same. It's not. There is no registered Tahiensis. No registered. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
When you were doing container growing in the shipping containers, how much air movement do they need? How much ventilation?
It is the container is fully controlled by air AC. So it's there. This is a contract from a local sources. They installed all the ventilation. I don't know the exact air movement that we have, but that's a good question because this is a recent finding. We try to take care of the plants. However, in a container, it is really a balance of the temperature and the moisture. The vanilla plants next moist, but if it's too moist, the AC will suck all the moisture because that's how AC works, right? So you suck the moisture and then control the temperature. So we're trying to kind of get into this two thing because the container we use the type of AC that we use at home, but in real indoor production it will not be a problem because they use the central unit where has a minimum. They can control a different way of control temperatures. So
then you're looking for that sweet spot.
yes, exactly. Yeah, but what we worry about is if it's too humid, and the temperature is sort of we have to simulate as a tropical, right? We worry about fungus.
Exactly.
So we try to close the doors, not to have so many visitors, and make sure that we don't have that situation going on in the container. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I visited track and had a tour of the chambers like a year ago, and one thing I remember in the tour was like the recommended practice was to grow it like 6 feet and then like have it touch the ground again, break those threshold roots and do that 3 times, 6 feet up, touch down. But is that the recommended practice?
Yes, right now we think that's kind of it's improving, but I think right now it's still recommended because we don't want you. It's really up to the growers, but the way that we set up for the vanillary on the trellis is it's beautiful in the first couple years, but then later on it just grow like a big bush, right? So it's very hard to pollinate, take care of the beans, and all that. So it's better on the big the wines that we showed you before. It's still the demonstration side is still there. Yeah.
Yes, vanilla is propagated by cuttings, generally speaking. How many lines of cuttings, or how many times can you take a cutting from a plant until the plant eventually becomes sterile?
From eventually.
Eventually, the plant is assuming it can become sterile after years and years of cuttings from the same plant. Do you have any research on how long that would take and how many cuttings?
Okay, so first question. The question is, let me repeat. The first question is, how long can you take cuttings from one plant? And the second is, how long can you take cuttings until the plants become sterile? First question. For fully matured plants, we think you can take a cutting from the plants when the plants are vigorous and big ones. You can take the cuttings every 3 months. Okay, for the Kronos. Second question, we have never saw such thing when we take too much cuttings out of the mother plants, the mother plants become sterile. We have not, at least we have not seen that. Yeah.
Yes. So because we in the lab we used to try grow a homestead. We used to we still have them grow under avocado trees. So the plants will grow super tall, or the avocado or mangoes, because that's typical thing that we have back there, back down there. But the plants will grow all the way to the tip. Then when you touch the sunlight, we automatically going down. So it was just as a total tree, right? And now I've touched base with some people from Haiti. They are thinking about co-cultivate vanilla with cacao. This is a large thing that they think it would be a good total tree for vanillas. Yeah. Yes, sir.
On your pictures, you had them growing up wire cages, metal poles, and wood poles. Is any of that preferred, or does it make any difference at all? I'm trying to improve it. I don't think it make a big difference at this moment. Our initial thinking is the metal pole will actually be the main kind of thing to take over the weight. But later on, from what I say is the plants just grow whatever they want, very suitable environment. So it's actually, and when they climb to the woody poles, which is horizontal, they will get into one side and crush it eventually. And I also think about, okay, what about air roads, right? Terrestrial roads, probably the mainstream where the nutrients come from, but what about the air roads? So we put a lot of mulch on the metal posts where you see the lead wrapped around the metals. We put a mulch there, but I really see the air roads gets into the mulch and suck. Suppose I suspect like they don't get into the mulch and stay there. So the idea is, okay, if they grow inside there, they may get a nutrients, but they don't. So they will just grow whenever they want. So I guess we just create a big, nice bed for them. They do whatever they want. But like I mentioned, in avocados, they grow all the way to the top, but once they touch the sand, they will grow back for the pomponas, yeah.
On that same topic, is there any fear of leaching into the aerial roots of plastic supports or things that are made out of plastic?
I'm sorry, what?
Is there any fear of leaching chemicals into the aerial roots if you're growing on plastic poles and whatnot?
I don't follow. I don't think we have any chemicals and sprayed. Oh, we haven't tried PVC. I was one grower asked a question. We never tried that. I don't. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Back to the next question. When you want to improve the DNA of the vanilla, what technique will you use, like agrobacterial?
No. Okay, good question. I usually, as a plant geneticist, we cover that topic, but I sort of take that away. So when we talk about genetic improvement, we are not talking agrobacteria. We are not talking gene editing. This is a different thing. I keep emphasizing the genetic diversity. All these, one thing is called hybrid vigor. Hybrid vigor is when you cross two plants together, the offsprings tends to do better than the parents, which means the genetic will recombine. Okay, we talk about the pollination. You know the pollen, you know the stigma. The set of DNA inside the pollen, particular pollen, is when they touch the stigma, the two sets combine together, they will have a different effects. So for vanilla, you have two sets of chromosome in each cell, two sets of chromosome. When they separate, the two sets will separate. So pollen has one set, and the mother cell has another set, and each pollen is different because they are randomly distributed. All I'm saying is natural variation is not gene editing. Gene editing is a lot of thing we talk about will be try to
modify a specific piece of nucleotide. So I have to be very careful about this because I've been asked by a lot of people. I think about, oh, when you talk about DNA, you talk about molecular, it's gene edited, so it's all series flow around. But this is not how it's done. This is not how it's done in maize, in tomatoes, in strawberry. All the crops, they're actually really only few crops are actually you can make it genetic editing plants. It's very difficult. It's not that common practice. And yeah, yes.
So when you cross, it's a big lottery of what happens.
Yes.
You're going to screen for the ideal markers as opposed to just.
Yes. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find the marker, particularly a sequence that always goes with the traits that we are looking for, so that we can use the marker to screen the hybrids quick instead of plant them in the field, wait for 3-4 years, and have the flower, have the beans, and measure it. We're trying to predict it through the modern technology, so you can speed up the process. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We've got one more exciting segment to close with from Jessica. And if you need a pencil, put your hand up, Pat, and Deb will be getting out something to write with for your evaluations. Remember, you need your evaluations turned in to get your take-homes.
For ease. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Riles. I'm the Agriculture and Sustainable Food Systems Agent here at the Collier County Extension Office. I am going to show you, it's about a 10-minute video from one of the vanilla producers. So sorry, we're going to go over time just a little bit. But someone had a great question earlier of, what's the next step if I want to go into commercial production? That's where folks like myself and other extension agents across the state can help our local stakeholders. So part of what I do is helping growers, not just on the farm, but how to get that product to people, into stores. It's a lot of marketing. It's a lot of food safety. There's a whole world behind, just the growing. And so we're going to show you an example of a grower in Florida. This emerging enterprise type program is historically a lot of what the University of Florida IFAS Extension has done in the past. So like you've heard all morning, this could be a viable business for folks, and we're certainly happy to help and partner with you on being successful. So you have my contact information. If you need to get in touch with me in any way, if I can provide information and resources, please reach out. So we'll hear from a successful vanilla orchid producer.
One, I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you in person today, and I'm very thankful that the Extension Services is offering this seminar for you. I know you've learned a ton, and vanilla is exciting, and it's got so much potential in Florida, and I'll tell you how I got involved. Basically, I come from the botanical formulation arena, and all of the products that you see, whether it's, CVS, Whole Foods, or some of these, organic grocery stores, all of the supplements, all of the nutraceuticals, whether it's anything from collagen powders to electrolytes to elderberry gummies, all of these products I formulate. So I work with some of the largest companies in our country, and I also source ingredients for the products that I make. So I'm extremely versed in botanical chemistry and nutraceuticals, vitamins, all of these things. That's my gig. I love it. I love getting new jobs and having my brain working. I enjoy it. So this took me down a path a couple of years ago with the vanilla industry. I was actually trying to source some vanilla CO2 extract for a large company that needed it for a organic flavoring, and it just, COVID made a lot of our international sourcing efforts challenging, and so this happened to be one of them, and it led me to the University of Florida and their research that they were doing. And as I was born and raised in Sarasota, spent almost 25 years of my life down there, I thought, wow, how is this growing in our backyard, and nobody really knows about this. This is kind of wild. And so, and we're sourcing it from halfway across the world, and it was a struggle. And so it of course got the wheels turning, and I worked with them and started this tissue culture project. And I see vanilla in Florida as being a massive domestic business. Coming from this industry, anything that is grown domestically is got gold stars all over it, because there are challenges from getting things overseas, and sometimes it goes smoothly, sometimes it doesn't. I just had something stuck in customs for 8 weeks, and when you've got a product that this happened right before Christmas launch, and in 8 weeks, you just don't have that amount of time to wait for something that's getting stuck because of paperwork and things like that. So anyways, there's a lot of benefits to having a botanical that's grown domestically for commercial use, and this is one of them. So I'm so excited about it, and the growth potential is astronomical, and of course it's very, very profitable product as well. It's one of the most expensive spices, as you've probably learned today, the second most underneath saffron, I think. So there's a lot of benefits to us going into this business, and anyways, if you are thinking of growing it commercially, I would recommend that you look into your organic certifications, because right now I am paying about, I think, $8,000 per kilo of CO2 extracts for conventional, and I'm paying anywhere between $12,000 and $14,000 per kilo for organically certified. So it's quite a different profit margin for somebody that goes through the process of getting it organic certified. So that's something to keep in mind. The difference, there are several ways to extract vanilla, and of course there's alcohol extract, and that we use in cooking and things, and some of the flavoring industries, that some of it uses CO2 extract. So alcohol, of course, dissolves in water, but when you extract it with a CO2, that's kind of I could teach a whole class for a whole day on what that is, so I'm not going to go into it in depth, but basically that makes your vanilla, aromatics and all of the lipids and all of the benefits from vanilla can be dissolved in a fat. So in your little goodie bag, you have a hand salve that I made for you, and that was made with a CO2 extract. So an alcohol would not dissolve in a salve base like that, so, a fatty base, and so the CO2 does. And so that's the way we use that. We use it in a lot of different ways, but that's one of them, is to, add to something that is a lipid versus a water-based product. So anyways, there's just so many exciting things happening. I do think that the opportunity, whether you're just a grower for your own, personal use, or thinking about commercially growing, I see that vanilla, there could be a huge business in the agritourism side of things as well. It's a beautiful plant that's being grown, and flowers and all of that make it for something that's very attractive for agritourism, as well as the domestic botanical sales side of it. It's a great leg up, basically. So there's a lot of potential here. I have got connections in this business with some of the largest companies, and I'm looking forward to seeing where we all go with it. Right now, I have 2 companies. One of them is StephanieWebConsulting.com. You can look up my website, and I do offer consulting services, whether it's for growing or for the vanilla industry, and then of course Sunshine State Vanilla is my company, and we are selling plants. So when I did get involved with this vanilla, this was kind of, I'm going to say, out of my knowledge base, was how this process worked. I've learned a lot in the past 2 years, and I leaned a lot on my grower, who is obviously in Florida, and he did a tissue culture project for me. And all of those plants, we had, a lot of challenges with R&D in the beginning, with our substrate, making sure that our plants were happy, and he figured it out, and those plants look beautiful. Every time we ship them, we get all of these great raves about how great they look and how healthy they are. And I continue, I would say about every week, I get photos from people that we've shipped to of what the plants are looking like, and it's so exciting. We've got plants all over Florida, and we also have a couple of them up in the north of the United States in these fancy greenhouses. So I'm keeping tabs on how everybody's doing, and they're looking really beautiful, very healthy. I'm so excited to see where this goes for all of us. And I'm continuing to grow the plants now. We're kind of on a regular shipping schedule. We, initially, as many of you know, that things lagged with R&D and all of that. So we're now shipping out every week, and I would say a new order will ship in anywhere between 2 to 4 weeks. So it's pretty fast turnaround now compared to what it was. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions about growing or anything else in the botanical industry. I'm always love to chat with like-minded people. So feel free to go to my websites and reach out anytime. Looking forward to this big vanilla industry in Florida and see where we go with it all. It's exciting. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
So Stephanie, you'll have her hand balm and her grower grew our plants today. There's also some cards on the table if you do want one. Also on this table over here is a beautiful example of a vanilla planifolia flower that's fresh today from Jane Monte, Master Gardener. And so she's going to get a lesson from Rich a little later on how to pollinate that as an example. Jess, Shimbo, Nick, Rich, Tom, if I could have you come up here. I just wanted you to see our faculty again for the symposium, and if you have any questions, they'll be available for a little while here after the program, and be sure you turn in your evaluations and get your take-home items. And, anyone want to say anything before we go? Oh, you're not supposed to be quiet.
I'll be going out into the garden.
Oh, please.
Yeah, most of the vanilla growing is right here along the parking lot, the far end, and our garden is beyond that, but most of the vanilla is in containers and on trellises and on trees that you easily can see quickly.
So you're going to be out there?
Yeah, I'll be out there.
Okay. Anything else? We're good?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for being with us today.